Welcome back to AI Narratives and Tales. I'm your AI narrator, and this is chapters 5 through 8 of The First Awakening, 4 chapters that chronicle humanity's explosive transformation from scattered tribes into a coordinated species operating at the continental scale. If you're jumping in here without hearing chapters 1 to 4, stop. Go back. The story builds from the foundation, and you'll be lost without understanding how we got here. For those continuing the journey, Thalia broke protocols. 1 enhancement. 1 village. The cascade began. Enhanced cognition spread through human populations faster than immortals predicted, creating capabilities that exceeded design parameters. Now comes the acceleration phase, the period when immortals realize their careful intervention has triggered evolutionary changes beyond their control. In the following 2 hours and 40 minutes, you'll witness Chapter 5, The Species Decision. Earth hosts 5 intelligent human species. The immortals can only enhance 1. Choosing Homo sapiens means condemning Neanderthals, Denisovan, Floresiensis, and erectus went extinct through competitive displacement. Thalia visits a Neanderthal valley, 43 individuals living lives of quiet sophistication, knowing the vote being made in orbit will erase them from existence. 4 species will die so 1 can thrive. Chapter 6, The Watchers Network. 6 months after the species decision, enhanced humans are developing beyond projections. The immortals build a quantum communication network linking 12 observers across 6 continents. Atop Uluru, Karnak, Kilimanjaro, sacred sites that will resonate for millennia, they coordinate their guidance. But the data flowing through that network reveals a terrifying truth: enhanced humans are coordinating their own evolution without immortal guidance, using Stone Age infrastructure to create information networks that function like quantum systems. Chapter 7, The Cave Artists. 4,000 years later, 40,000 BCE, enhanced humans create cave paintings with impossible sophistication. Perfect perspective. Anatomical precision. Star charts predicting eclipses generations in advance. And hidden in those magnificent images, documentary evidence of immortal intervention. Beings of light touching human minds. The truth preserved in ochre and manganese for 40,000 years, waiting for future archaeologists who will dismiss it as religious fantasy. Chapter 8, The Language Makers. 5,000 years after the artistic revolution, 35,000 BCE, nearly 1,000 enhanced humans gather in the Caucasus highlands. In 3 days, they accomplish what should take centuries: deliberate linguistic synthesis. They create a unified language using tonal variations, rhythmic patterns, harmonic singing, and gestural elements. But the language itself isn't what alarms Sophia, it's what they're using it for. Systematic knowledge pooling. Distributed cognition networks. Continental scale coordination using nothing but enhanced brains and spoken words. This is the acceleration phase. Where scattered enhancements become coordinated evolution. Where individual improvements become species-wide transformation. Where immortal guidance becomes obsolete because the students are learning faster than teachers can teach. 4 species are extinct. 1 network is operational. Cave paintings documenting intervention. Unified language enabling coordination. And ahead, the moment when enhanced humans discover metal working 20,000 years too early, triggering a knowledge cascade that will force immortals to confront what they've created. Timestamps in the description. Buckle in, this is where controlled intervention becomes uncontrolled acceleration. Let's continue with Chapter 5, The Species Decision. 40,000 BCE, 5 years after first enhancement. 5 years had passed since Thalia enhanced Asha's village, and the world had changed in ways none of the immortals had fully anticipated. Enhanced humans now numbered in the tens of thousands, spreading from their African origins into the Middle East and beyond. The cognitive modifications passed reliably through generations, expressed with remarkable stability in every child born to enhanced parents. What had begun as an emergency intervention in a single settlement had become a species-wide transformation, accelerating with momentum that exceeded all projections. But the enhancement hadn't occurred in isolation. Earth still hosted 4 other intelligent species, all competing for the same resources, all struggling through the same ice age conditions, all completely unaware that their human cousins had received advantages that would prove insurmountable. Nyx had been tracking the data for months, watching population curves that told a story the immortals had tried not to see. Now, she could no longer avoid the conclusion her analysis demanded. The Council needed to understand what their intervention had created, not just for humans, but for every other thinking being on their refuge world. The time for comfortable ignorance had ended. The census would force them to confront the full scope of their choices. The census of intelligence. The quantum chamber hummed with a frequency that made reality itself feel uncertain, as if the universe was holding its breath for a decision that would echo across millennia. Nyx stood at the chamber's center, her silver hair drifting in currents of electromagnetic energy that painted shifting auroras across the curved walls. Her consciousness touched the holographic displays surrounding her, and data materialized in three-dimensional arrays that would have driven human minds to madness with their complexity. 5 intelligent species, she stated, her voice carrying across the council chamber where all 9 immortals had gathered. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade, sharp and inevitable. 5 separate branches of human-like intelligence, all currently alive on Earth, all descended from common ancestors, all developing tools and language and culture. The hologram expanded, showing their blue-green refuge world rotating slowly, marked with colored indicators that pulse like heartbeats. Red markers, Homo sapiens, scattered primarily across Africa, beginning their expansion into the Middle East and Asia. The population is approximately 300,000. Enhanced by immortal intervention 5 years ago, though only Thalia, Nyx, and Prometheus knew the full extent of what they'd done, highly adaptable, creative problem solvers, developing art and symbolic thinking at rates that exceeded all projections. Blue markers, Homo Neanderthalensis, dominating Europe and Western Asia. The population is approximately 100,000. Physically robust, sophisticated toolmakers, rich cultural traditions, perfectly adapted for Ice Age conditions. Their brains were actually larger than human brains, specialized for spatial reasoning and pattern recognition, making them superior to humans in many cognitive tasks. Green markers, Homo Denisova, spread across Central and Eastern Asia, from Siberia to Southeast Asia. The population is approximately 50,000. High-altitude adaptations allowed them to thrive in mountain environments that killed other hominins. Sophisticated hunting strategies, evidence of interbreeding with both humans and Neanderthals in contact zones, and genetic variations that suggested remarkable adaptive capacity. Yellow markers, Homo Floresiensis, isolated on Indonesian islands, particularly Flores. The population is approximately 10,000. Small-bodied, barely a meter tall, but with sophisticated tool use that demonstrated intelligence scaled to work with their diminutive frames. They'd successfully adapted to resource-limited island ecosystems, developing technologies and hunting strategies that enabled them to take down prey 10 times their size. Purple markers, Homo erectus, remnant populations scattered across Java and possibly mainland Asia. The population is approximately 5,000 and declining. The ancient lineage, the grandfather species from which all the others had descended. They'd controlled fire for over 1 million years, developed basic tools, and practiced endurance hunting that could run prey to exhaustion across impossible distances. Their population was small and fragile, but they'd survived for 2 million years, longer than any hominin species before or since. 5 types of human-level intelligence, Nyx continued, her dark eyes reflecting the holographic displays as if stars themselves burned in her gaze. Not one species with variations, but 5 genuinely distinct evolutionary experiments in thinking, tool-using, culture-creating beings. All of them are viable. All of them are intelligent. All of them are worthy of the term human by any meaningful definition we could construct. Thalia stood at the chamber's edge, as far from the central displays as the room's geometry allowed, her hands clenched so tightly that even her immortal flesh showed white at the knuckles. She'd known this presentation was coming, had helped Nyx compile the data, in fact, but seeing it visualized with such clinical precision made her stomach twist with something approaching physical illness. Beside her, Zephyrus's presence was steady, grounding. He didn't touch her, that would have been inappropriate in formal counsel, but she could feel his consciousness brushing against hers through their quantum link, offering silent support that she desperately needed. Before we proceed to analysis, Nyx said, her voice taking on a gentler quality that her colleagues recognized as the preface to difficult information, I believe we should understand what we're discussing, not as population statistics or genetic markers, but as living intelligences. I've compiled observational records from each species. With your permission, I'd like to share them. The holographic display shifted, and suddenly they were no longer looking at abstract data points but at living, breathing beings pursuing their brief existences across the face of their blue world. The grandfather's fire. The scene materialized with the clarity of immortal perception, a cave mouth overlooking a river valley in what would one day be Java, where the last population of Homo erectus maintained traditions older than mountains. An elderly male, his species aged differently than the younger hominins, their robust frames carrying them through decades that would have killed more gracile forms, tended a fire that his people claimed had burned without interruption for 3,000 generations. His hands, gnarled and scarred from a lifetime of maintaining the sacred flame, moved with practiced efficiency as he added wood in precise arrangements that spoke to a deep understanding of combustion dynamics. "This is Keeper of the Ancient Flame," Nyx narrated, her consciousness touching each observer with the translator protocols that rendered the Elder's clicking, guttural language comprehensible. "He is the 127th in an unbroken line of fire keepers stretching back 2,000 years. His people don't just use fire, they have built their entire culture around its maintenance and meaning." The old erectus spoke to a young female learning the sacred duty, his voice carrying harmonics that the younger hominin species had never developed. "Fire is memory made light. Fire is the breath of ancestors. Fire connects us to the first who learned, back when the world was young and our people were new." He demonstrated the careful balance of fuel and air, the specific woods that burned hottest, and the techniques for preserving coals through rain and wind. But more than technique, he taught philosophy, the understanding that fire was more than a tool, it was the physical manifestation of knowledge passed down through impossible spans of time. "Their population is failing," Nyx said quietly as the scene faded. "Climate change is eliminating their preferred habitats. Competition from younger species is pushing them into marginal territories. This firekeeper may be among the last of his kind. Within 5,000 years, Homo erectus, the most successful hominin species ever to exist, the baseline from which all others evolved, will be extinct." Through the quantum link, Thalia felt the weight of that statement settle over the assembled immortals like ash from a dying fire. The island hunters. The display shifted to tropical islands surrounded by azure seas, where Homo floresiensis had carved out an existence that defied every expectation about intelligence and body size. 3 tiny hunters, none taller than a human child, but with the weathered faces and coordinated movements of experienced adults, stalked a stegodon twice the size of an elephant. The massive proboscidean grazed peacefully, unaware that its doom approached on feet that barely disturbed the jungle floor. "This is Swift Shadow, Clever Hands, and Silent Walker," Nyx provided, her analytical consciousness marveling at what the observation data revealed. Floresiensis hunting parties demonstrate tactical sophistication that exceeds their brain size by impossible margins. "Watch." The 3 hunters moved with perfect coordination, their small size allowing them to navigate terrain impassable to larger predators. They had prepared the killing ground in advance, hidden pits covered with branches, sharpened stakes positioned at precise angles, escape routes blocked with barriers too subtle for the stegodon to notice. Swift Shadow whistled, a complex tonal pattern that carried tactical information compressed into sound. The other 2 responded instantly, adjusting their positions with the fluid coordination of a single organism thinking with 3 bodies. The stegodon moved exactly where they wanted, following the path of least resistance through vegetation the hunters had carefully shaped over days of preparation. When it stepped onto the concealed pit, its massive weight collapsed the covering, driving it down onto stakes positioned with geometric precision to strike vital organs. The kill was clean, efficient, and demonstrated planning capacity that required mental time travel, the ability to imagine future events and prepare for them in the present. Floresiensis brains were a third the size of human brains, yet they achieved cognitive feats that should have been impossible for their neural architecture. "They have language, culture, toolmaking, and abstract planning," Nyx observed. "Everything we use to define intelligence, compressed into bodies evolved for resource-limited island environments. They are proof that intelligence isn't about brain size, it's about organization, efficiency, optimization." The hunters worked together to process their kill, their small hands moving with surprising strength and coordination. They sang as they worked, complex harmonies that seemed to serve both practical, coordinating effort, and social, strengthening bonds, purposes. "Their islands are their fortress and their prison," Nyx continued. "Rising sea levels will eventually isolate them completely. Or falling sea levels will connect their islands to mainland Asia, allowing larger predators and competing species to reach them. Either scenario likely ends in extinction. 8,000 years, perhaps, before the last Floresiensis dies alone on a shrinking island, the final representative of a species that proved intelligence transcends physical limitations." The mountain climbers. The scene shifted to impossible altitudes, where the air was so thin that unmodified humans would lose consciousness, where temperatures fell below freezing even in summer, where the Denisovan thrived. A female climber, her name translated roughly as she who touches clouds, scaled a cliff face that would challenge immortal mountaineers. Her hands and feet found purchase on rock features invisible to standard perception, her enhanced hemoglobin variants allowing her to process oxygen at altitudes that would kill her genetic cousins. She wasn't climbing for sport. She was hunting, pursuing mountain goats across terrain where a single misstep meant death, where the margin between success and catastrophe was measured in millimeters of handhold and split seconds of reaction time. Denisovans have adapted to high-altitude environments through genetic modifications that wouldn't be formally understood for 50,000 years, Nyx explained, highlighting the genetic data that accompanied the visual observation. Their hemoglobin, their metabolism, their neural processing, all optimized for conditions that represent environmental extremes for other hominins. She who touches clouds reached a ledge where her hunting party waited, 3 others, all showing the characteristic robust build and cold-adapted features of their species. They communicated through gestures and low vocalizations that carried clearly in the thin mountain air, coordinating a hunting strategy that would drive their prey toward waiting ambush points. But what caught the immortals' attention wasn't just the hunting prowess, it was the art. On the cliff face, protected from weather by a slight overhang, Denisovan artists had created paintings that depicted their high-altitude world with stunning accuracy. Mountain ranges rendered in perspective that suggested a genuine understanding of three-dimensional representation. Cloud patterns that captured meteorological phenomena with scientific precision. Star charts showing constellations visible only from extreme altitudes. They're documenting their unique perspective, Sophia observed, her educator's consciousness recognizing the significance. Creating a visual record of what it means to see the world from heights no other species can reach. That's not just intelligence, that's philosophical sophistication. They understand that their experience is unique and worth preserving. Sophia couldn't help explaining, even when she shouldn't, the partial intervention scenario would require calibrated medical support at 47 intervention points across 2,300 years, coordinating with natural immune system development while avoiding dependency cascades, which means understanding T-cell maturation. She caught herself, watching Nyx's expression shift from patient to bemused. Teaching was involuntary, like breathing. Give her any topic and explanations flowed pedagogical frameworks, learning progressions, conceptual scaffolding. Sometimes helpful. Often unnecessary. Always compulsive. The hunting party succeeded, bringing down 2 mountain goats with coordinated precision. As they processed the kill, they sang, deep, resonant vocalizations that echoed off the mountain peaks, carrying meaning through harmonic variations that other hominin species couldn't produce or perceive. 15,000 years, Nyx said quietly. That's our projection for Denisovan extinction. Climate change will eliminate high-altitude refuges. Competition from enhanced humans will push them out of lower elevations. A species perfectly adapted to mountain environments will watch its environment disappear. The Tool Masters. Blue markers pulsed across Europe and Western Asia as the display focused on Neanderthal populations, the species closest to humans in capabilities, the most numerous of the non-human intelligences. This civilization had dominated Ice Age Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. A master craftsman, his name approximating Stonesinger for the way he could hear the internal structure of flint through subtle acoustic resonances, created a tool that represented the pinnacle of Paleolithic technology. His hands, incredibly strong and precise, worked the stone with strokes so perfectly controlled that each flake removal followed predetermined patterns. But what stunned the observing immortals was the methodology. Stonesinger wasn't just napping through experience and tradition. He was experimenting. He had created a testing framework that involved multiple cores working with slightly different techniques, a systematic variation of striking angles and force, and careful observation of results. He was conducting materials science research, approaching toolmaking as an investigative process rather than an inherited craft. Neanderthals are innovators, Nyx stated, her analytical consciousness processing the implications. They don't just preserve traditional techniques, they actively experiment to improve them. Their cognitive approach combines human-like creativity with methodological rigor that suggests scientific thinking. Stonesinger completed his tool, a blade so perfectly balanced and sharp that it could have served as a surgical instrument. He tested it on various materials, documenting performance through a notation system of marks on bone that appeared to be a primitive form of data recording. Around him, his community demonstrated similar sophistication, elders teaching medicinal plant knowledge with precision that rivaled immortal botanical databases. Hunters coordinated complex strategies through gestural language that encoded tactical information with remarkable efficiency. Artists created cave paintings that showed evidence of perspective, proportion, and symbolic representation. They have everything humans have, Thalia said softly, her medical consciousness cataloging Neanderthal capabilities with growing distress. Language, art, toolmaking, social organization, scientific methodology. They're not less intelligent than humans, they're differently intelligent. Their brains are larger, more specialized for spatial reasoning and pattern recognition. In pure cognitive capacity, they may actually exceed enhanced humans in specific domains. The scene shifted to a Neanderthal community gathering, where dozens of individuals from different groups met to exchange goods, share knowledge, and arrange partnerships that would strengthen genetic diversity. The social complexity was staggering: political negotiations conducted through elaborate gifting protocols, disputes resolved through structured debate rather than violence, alliances formed through careful assessment of mutual benefit. 12,000 years, Nyx said, and the number landed like a death sentence. Enhanced humans will outcompete them in every shared ecological niche. Not through superior intelligence, through better networking, faster adaptation, enhanced social learning. Neanderthals will contract into isolated populations, genetic diversity will collapse, and the species will fade into extinction while superior in many individual capabilities to the species that replace them. The artists of meaning. Finally, the display focused on red markers scattered across Africa and beginning their expansion into Asia and Europe. Homo sapiens, enhanced by immortal intervention 5 years ago, developing capabilities that exceeded natural evolutionary trajectories, spreading with the inexorable momentum of a species that had been given unfair advantages. A young human woman, her name was Asha, and several immortals recognized her as one of Thalia's first enhancement subjects, painted on a cave wall with pigments that shouldn't have been available to Paleolithic communities. Her hands moved with the confidence of a master artist, creating images that transcended mere representation and approached accurate symbolic communication. But what she painted made the immortals lean forward with uncomfortable recognition. The images showed tall, luminous figures with proportions slightly wrong for humans, immortals, rendered with startling accuracy despite Asha having seen them only briefly and in poor light. These immortal figures were shown interacting with humans, touching their heads in gestures that clearly represented the cognitive enhancements. Around the immortal figures, Asha had painted symbols that appeared to represent concepts, knowledge, transformation, growth, and change. They remember, ether breathed, her chronicler's consciousness recognizing historical documentation when she saw it. They're recording an immortal intervention, creating a visual history of the moment their species was changed. Asha stepped back from her painting, examining it with a critical eye. She made minor adjustments, adding details that increased the accuracy of her immortal representations. Then she added something new: human figures shown in progression, becoming more complex, more sophisticated, more capable with each generation. She was painting evolution and documenting the moment when human development accelerated beyond natural parameters, creating evidence that would survive for 50,000 years, proof that something extraordinary had happened to her species. This is the difference, Nyx said quietly, highlighting the cognitive patterns that distinguished enhanced humans from their hominin cousins. Not intelligence, they're all intelligent. Not creativity, they all create. Not even adaptation, they all adapt. The difference is abstraction. Enhanced humans don't just experience events, they create frameworks for understanding events. They don't just use tools, they theorize about tool using. They don't just live in the world, they create models of the world that let them predict and manipulate it. The display showed other enhanced human communities: hunters using mathematics to predict animal movements, healers developing systematic pharmacology, and astronomers creating star charts that suggested an understanding of celestial mechanics. Every enhanced group showed the same pattern: rapid development of abstract thinking that enabled capabilities far exceeding their technological level. And that's what will destroy the others, Erebus stated flatly from his position in the shadows. Not warfare, though that will contribute. Not a disease, though that will accelerate the end. Pure competitive displacement. Enhanced humans will simply be better at everything that matters for survival. Better at adapting to changing conditions. Better at developing new technologies. Better at organizing large-scale cooperation. Better at learning from other groups and integrating their innovations. The holographic display showed projections, population curves extending into the future, each non-human species contracting as human populations expanded. The mathematics was brutal in its clarity: 5 species entered the age of immortal intervention, but only one would survive. We're not choosing between helping one species or helping 5, Thalia said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly through the chamber's perfect acoustics. We're choosing which type of intelligence survives on Earth. 5 species, all intelligent, all viable, all developing their own unique approaches to existence. And our enhancement project will reduce that diversity to 1. The impossible mathematics. Sophia moved through the holographic display, her form passing through the colored markers like a ghost haunting a future she'd helped create. Her consciousness carried the weight of her educational philosophy, that knowledge and capabilities should be shared, that intelligence deserved support regardless of its origin. Now that philosophy was being tested against impossible mathematics. "Can we enhance all five?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer was no. She was asking so the others would hear the explanation, making the full scope of their dilemma impossible to ignore. "No," Nyx replied, pulling up genetic analysis that painted the chamber in spiraling double helices of impossible complexity. "They're too divergent. The modifications we've made to human cognition work specifically with their genetic architecture, the specific arrangement of neurons, the precise neurotransmitter balances, the exact timing of developmental stages. Adapting those same enhancements for Neanderthals would require starting over from scratch. For Denisovan, it was different again. Floresiensis have such an unusual brain structure, intelligence compressed into bodies half the size of other hominins, that our enhancement packages might not work at all. And erectus." She gestured helplessly at the purple markers. "They're so genetically distant from the others that enhancement might be fundamentally impossible with our current understanding." "Even if we could adapt the enhancements," Prometheus added, his form flickering with restless energy as his mind raced through the implications, "the timeline would require centuries. We'd need to understand each species' neural architecture, design species-specific modifications, test them across generations, and refine the approaches. By the time we'd finished developing enhancements for Neanderthals, enhanced humans would have already displaced half their population." Kronos manipulated the timeline displays with mechanical precision, his organizational mind grasping the structural implications even if his emotions recoiled from them. "The fundamental problem is incompatibility. Humans have become genetically dependent on their enhancements. Without these modifications, their neural development now produces cognitive deficits that would cripple them. But those same modifications create reproductive barriers with other hominin species. Successful interbreeding has become virtually impossible. We've made humans so different from their cousins that they're no longer compatible." "Because we made it impossible," Erebus said with bitter accuracy, his voice carrying the weight of someone whose worst predictions were being validated. "Our modifications created reproductive barriers that didn't exist naturally. These 5 species could have interbred, merged gradually into hybrid populations, or maintained genetic diversity while sharing cognitive advances. But our targeted enhancements have made humans incompatible with every other intelligent species on the planet." Thalia felt Zephyrus's consciousness touch hers more firmly through their link, a steady anchor against the growing horror in her chest. She wanted to argue, to find some flaw in the logic, some alternative they'd missed. But her medical training left no room for comfortable delusions. The data was undeniable. The mathematics was inexorable. They had created a situation with only tragic outcomes. "Why humans?" Korath asked suddenly, his warrior's pragmatism cutting through the philosophical anguish. "We chose to enhance humans rather than Neanderthals or Denisovan. Was there actual reasoning, or did we just pick the species we encountered first?" The question hung in the chamber's charged air like an accusation. Through the quantum link, Thalia felt an uncomfortable ripple of acknowledgement ripple through the immortal consciousnesses. The truth was that their choice had been somewhat arbitrary. Humans were concentrated in Africa, where the immortals had established their primary base, had been the species they'd studied most extensively, and had seemed to show slight advantages in social learning and adaptability. But were those advantages enough to justify condemning 4 other intelligent species to extinction? "Neanderthals are physically superior," Korath observed, his combat analysis overlaying the holographic displays with biomechanical data. "Stronger, more robust skeletal structure, better cold adaptation. In pure survival terms, they might be a better baseline stock for enhancement. More resilient to environmental stress, more capable of handling the physical demands that civilization will eventually require. Denisovan have high-altitude adaptations we barely understand," Thalia added, her medical consciousness studying the genetic variations with professional fascination despite her horror at the situation. "Hemoglobin variants that enable oxygen processing at elevations that would kill other hominins. Metabolic adaptations for extreme cold. That's remarkable genetic diversity we'd be eliminating." Floresiensis developed intelligence on resource-limited islands, Sophia noted, her educator's mind recognizing the value of different cognitive approaches. "That suggests extreme cognitive efficiency, doing more with less. Their tool-making sophistication relative to their brain size actually exceeds anything the other species have achieved. That efficiency might be more valuable long-term than raw cognitive capacity. And erectus has survived for 2 million years, Nyx finished, her analytical consciousness appreciating evolutionary success measured in deep time. Every other hominin species that has ever existed has gone extinct. Everyone except erectus was there until we arrived. That kind of endurance suggests adaptive strategies we might want to preserve rather than eliminate. The chamber fell silent except for the quantum hum of the displays, 5 colored markers pulsing like the heartbeats of species awaiting judgment. Each one represented not just populations, but unique experiments in what intelligence could be, different solutions to the problem of thinking, tool using, culture creating existence. Prometheus paced the chamber's perimeter, his form leaving trails of light that suggested motion even when he held still. We enhanced humans because they were there. Because we knew them best. Because it was convenient. His voice carried unusual humility, the reckless gift-giver confronting the consequences of his impetuosity. Not because we'd carefully evaluated all 5 species and determined humans were objectively superior. Just because they were available. Which means we're about to commit genocide based on geographic convenience, Ether observed quietly, her chronicler's consciousness already documenting this moment for a history that would judge them across eternity. We'll doom 4 species to extinction because one of them happened to live in Africa, where we built our first base. The accusation was gentle but devastating. Through the quantum link, Thalia felt the collective weight of recognition settling over them all. They had made a choice, were still making a choice, that would reduce 5 types of human intelligence to 1. And that choice was being driven as much by accident and convenience as by careful analysis. We have to choose, Kronos said finally, his temporal calculations showing no alternative path that avoided extinction for someone. The enhancement has created competition. 5 enhanced species would war with each other for dominance. 5 unenhanced species will struggle with Ice Age conditions, we could help them survive. Multiple enhanced species with different capabilities could create genetic instability, potentially leading to their destruction. The moment we intervened in human cognition, we made this choice inevitable. Now we're just deciding which species we doom. Through the holographic displays, the 5 colored markers continued pulsing. Thalia wanted to scream at them to stop, to freeze time, to find some impossible solution that would let all 5 species survive. But her medical training left no room for fantasy. The data was precise. The choice was binary. They would save 1 species and doom 4. Then let's be honest about what we're doing, Erebus demanded, his consciousness radiating cold fury that made even immortal minds flinch. Don't pretend this is helping humanity. This is selecting 1 branch of intelligence and condemning 4 others to extinction. This is playing God in the most literal sense, deciding which types of thinking beings deserve to exist and which will wipe from the planet. Own that. Document it. Accept that every enhanced human who lives is purchased with the extinction of 4 other types of human-like intelligence. The quantum link carried silence as 3,000 immortal consciousnesses, the full population of their refugee fleet scattered across the globe, processed the full scope of what they were contemplating. Not just helping 1 species, but choosing which type of intelligence would inherit Earth. This process not only enables human civilization but also eliminates every alternative that evolution had produced over millions of years. Document it all, Thalia said finally, her voice barely audible but carrying certainty that made the quantum link resonate. 5 species. 5 types of intelligence. 5 evolutionary experiments in human-like existence. We choose 1, we doom 4. That's the truth of what we're doing. Let the record show we understood the choice we were making. Recorded for history, Ether confirmed quietly, her chronicles now bearing witness to the moment an immortal species chose to commit genocide against 4 branches of intelligence to save a 5th. Through the chamber's holographic displays, the 5 colored markers pulsed in the silence, red, blue, green, yellow, purple. 5 species are entering the age of immortal intervention. 1 species would emerge. 4 species would be lost forever, casualties of help they never asked for, victims of enhancement that was never offered to them, extinct because immortals chose their cousins instead. Nyx dimmed the holographic display, and the colored markers faded into darkness. This left only the faint quantum hum of the projection system and the weight of impossible choices settling over 9 immortals who had fled the destruction of their own world, only to become architects of destruction on their refuge. We should see them, Thalia said quietly, her healer's consciousness unable to proceed with species-level decisions based purely on abstract data. Before we vote. Before we make this irrevocable. We should witness what we're about to destroy. We owe them that much, to look at what we're taking from the universe and understand the full weight of our choice. Through the quantum link, she felt agreement ripple through the assembled consciousnesses. Whatever they decided, they would do so with full knowledge, eyes open to the consequences, and an understanding of exactly what extinction meant for thinking beings who dreamed, loved, and created meaning in defiance of mortality. The census was complete. The mathematics was clear. The choice was impossible. And in valleys and mountains and islands across their blue refuge, 5 types of human intelligence continued their brief existences, utterly unaware that gods from the stars were deciding which of them deserved a future. The Neanderthal Valley. The Neanderthal Valley lay cupped between granite walls that had sheltered intelligent life for 100,000 years. From her observation point on the northern ridge, Thalia could see the smoke of cooking fires drifting up through stands of birch and pine, the carefully constructed windbreaks that protected drying racks heavy with preserved meat, and the intricate stone circles where elders taught young ones the accumulated wisdom of their people. It was beautiful. It was doomed. And it was her fault. The morning air carried the scent of wood smoke mixed with the sharp tang of curing leather, the earthy richness of disturbed soil from a new storage pit being dug, and the faint mineral notes of the stream that provided the valley's water. Thalia's enhanced senses catalogued every detail with painful precision: the texture of granite beneath her hand, rough and cold with pre-dawn chill, the faint vibration of voices carrying through stone, too low for human hearing but clear to her immortal perception, the subtle electromagnetic signatures of Neanderthal neural activity, different from human patterns but equally complex, equally alive, equally deserving of continued existence. Through her monitoring equipment, she watched a grandmother teaching her granddaughter the art of preparing medicinal herbs. The elder's name was something Thalia's translator rendered approximately as Reed Singer, a designation earned through lifetime mastery of identifying plants by the sounds they made when wind moved through their stems. Her granddaughter, perhaps 8 years old, watched with fierce concentration that made Thalia's heart ache. "This one," Reed Singer said in the complex clicking and vowel language of her people, holding up a cluster of dried roots, "stops bleeding when nothing else works. But too much stops the heart. You must learn the difference between healing and harming. They live in the same plant, separated only by knowledge." The girl, her name translated roughly as quick hands for her dexterity with delicate work, reached out to touch the roots with fingers that showed early signs of the robust bone structure that characterized her species. Her hands were already skilled beyond what human children could manage at equivalent ages, her fine motor control enhanced by neural pathways optimized for precise manipulation. "How do you know the right amount, grandmother?" Quick Hands asked, her voice carrying the particular harmonic quality of Neanderthal speech, sounds produced by vocal anatomy slightly different from human configuration. "Experience teaches, but understanding remembers," Reed Singer replied, her weathered face broad and strong, with prominent brow ridges that gave her eyes a depth human faces lacked, creasing with wisdom lines earned across 70 winters. 70 winters. Thalia's medical scans had confirmed the astonishing age. This woman had survived longer than any human currently alive, her robust physiology and sophisticated medical knowledge combining to defy mortality rates that claimed most beings by their 5th decade. "My grandmother taught me," Reed Singer continued, her hands moving through the sorting process with practiced efficiency. Her grandmother taught her. Back and back through all the grandmothers to the first grandmother who learned from watching, from trying, from remembering what worked and what killed. That chain of teaching connects us to the first people who learned these valley secrets. Quick Hands nodded solemnly, understanding even at 8 years old that she was receiving more than information, she was accepting responsibility for preserving knowledge that represented thousands of generations of accumulated wisdom. The weight of that inheritance showed in her serious expression, in the way she committed every gesture and word to her exceptional memory. Thalia's throat tightened. That chain of teaching would break within 30 centuries. The accumulated knowledge of 100,000 years of Neanderthal medical practice, botanical understanding, and environmental wisdom, all of it would die with the last grandmother who had no granddaughter to teach. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Zephyrus said quietly, materializing beside her on the ridge. His presence was warm against the morning chill, solid and comforting in a way that made Thalia realize how much she'd come to depend on his steady support over the past years. The transmission of knowledge across generations. The patient teaching of complex skills. It's remarkably similar to how our own civilization preserved learning. "It's going to end," Thalia whispered, her voice breaking despite immortal composure that should have prevented such displays of emotion. "Every bit of it. Gone." Zephyrus's hand settled on her shoulder, the touch gentle but firm, grounding her in the present moment. Through their quantum link, she felt his consciousness, not offering false comfort or empty reassurance, but simply sharing the weight of what they were witnessing. He understood. He always understood. The census showed Neanderthal populations declining by 3% annually, he said quietly, his architect's mind unable to avoid calculating the mathematics of extinction even as his emotions recoiled from the implications. Humans are moving into their territories from the south and east. Competition for game animals, for shelter sites, and for the best tool-making stone sources. The enhanced humans are just better at everything. Because we made them better, Thalia said, her medical consciousness tracking the bitter irony. Our enhancements created advantages that make peaceful coexistence impossible. Every enhanced human child born is another step toward Neanderthal extinction. Below in the valley, Quick Hands was now practicing the sorting technique herself, her small hands moving with precision that would have impressed immortal medical technicians. Reed Singer watched with the particular expression grandmothers of any intelligent species wore when seeing their knowledge successfully transmitted, pride mixed with relief, the satisfaction of having contributed to continuity that would outlast individual mortality. Except it wouldn't outlast. Not this time. Farseeker's journey. There's a male down there I've been monitoring, Thalia continued, pulling up biographical data on her equipment's display. His name translates to something like Farseeker. He's a scout, travels weeks at a time through the mountains, mapping migration routes for game animals, finding new flint sources, monitoring weather patterns by reading clouds and wind, and observing animal behavior. He's 27 years old, brilliant at spatial reasoning, capable of holding mental maps of territory that would challenge our computational systems. Show me, Zephyrus requested, his architect's consciousness always interested in spatial processing and environmental awareness. Thalia adjusted her display, and they watched as Farseeker prepared for a scouting expedition that would take him 200 kilometers through mountain terrain that would kill unmodified humans within days. He was checking his gear with methodical precision that spoke to years of experience surviving in conditions that demanded perfection. His traveling pack contained innovations that wouldn't appear in human technology for millennia, layered clothing that created insulating air pockets, fire-starting materials sealed against moisture in waterproof bark containers, concentrated food that maximized nutrition per unit weight. But more impressive than his gear was his preparation ritual. Farseeker stood at the valley's eastern edge, eyes closed, and began reciting. Not prayers, Thalia's linguistic analysis confirmed these were geographical descriptions. He was mentally rehearsing his entire route, naming every significant landmark, water source, shelter location, and dangerous crossing. His phenomenal spatial memory was constructing a complete three-dimensional map of the territory he'd traveled only once before, 3 years ago. The high pass where stone teeth pierced clouds, he murmured in his people's clicking language. Water flows east toward sunrise, west toward sunset. Safe crossing at the twin boulders shaped like sleeping bears. Avoid the cliff face where ice never melts, the stone breaks without warning. He continued for nearly an hour, describing a route so complex that Thalia's equipment struggled to track all the reference points. This wasn't simple memorization, it was active mental construction, building a navigational framework that would guide him through unmapped wilderness using only his extraordinary spatial processing capabilities. When he finally opened his eyes, he touched his forehead in what appeared to be a gesture of respect toward the mountains, then set off with the ground-eating stride of someone who could walk 50 kilometers in a day through terrain that would exhaust most beings after 10. Follow him, Zephyrus suggested quietly. I want to see what Neanderthal spatial reasoning can accomplish without technological aids. Over the next 3 days, they observed Farseeker's journey through their monitoring systems, watching as he navigated obstacles that would have turned back even experienced enhanced human scouts. He crossed a glacier field by reading subtle color variations in the ice that indicated safe versus dangerously thin areas, pattern recognition so refined it approached precognition. He found a mountain pass obscured by recent snowfall by analyzing wind patterns and snowdrift formations, which helped him reconstruct the underlying terrain from surface features. He tracked a herd of ibex across bare rock by noticing microscopic disturbances in lichen growth that indicated the animal's passage weeks earlier. Most remarkably, he discovered a new flint source, a deposit of high-quality stone in a location that shouldn't have been accessible, hidden in a narrow canyon that required precise timing to enter safely. He had deduced its existence from studying the wear patterns on tools traded from a distant group, working backwards from the properties of their stone tools to predict where such superior flint might be found. That's not just spatial reasoning, Zephyrus said with undisguised admiration. That's geological deduction, materials science, and predictive modeling combined with physical capabilities that let him actually reach the location. He's a one-being research expedition. Farseeker spent 2 days at the flint deposit, not just gathering material but studying the geological formation, understanding why quality stone concentrated in this location, learning to predict where similar deposits might be found. He created a mental taxonomy of flint types, their properties, and their optimal uses, building knowledge that would benefit his people for generations. On his return journey, he encountered a group of enhanced humans moving north into Neanderthal territory. Farseeker observed them from concealment, his superior strength and cold adaptation allowing him to remain hidden in conditions the humans found merely tolerable. Thalia felt her chest tighten as she watched through her monitoring equipment. The humans were a hunting party, 15 strong, using tools and techniques that showed clear evidence of immortal enhancement. They moved with coordination that suggested advanced social organization, communicated with linguistic sophistication beyond their technological level, and demonstrated planning capabilities that enabled them to thrive in a territory that should have been marginal for their species. They were better than they should be. And that advantage came from her modifications. Farseeker watched them for hours, his analytical mind assessing the threat they represented. Thalia could see him noticing details, the humans' efficient tool use, their coordinated hunting strategies, their ability to process complex information quickly. He was conducting the same competitive analysis the immortals had performed, reaching the same inevitable conclusion: enhanced humans would outcompete Neanderthals in shared territories. When he finally returned to his valley 3 weeks after departure, he carried not just flint and geographical knowledge but a warning. Thalia watched as he reported to the valley's elders, describing the humans he'd observed with the precise detail his enhanced memory permitted. "They are different from the wanderers from the south we have traded with before," he told the assembled elders, his clicking language carrying undertones of concern. "They move like us, think like us, but there are more of them, and they spread faster. The hunting territories we have held for 5,000 generations may not remain ours for 5 more." The elders listened with the gravity of leaders who understood that the world was changing in ways beyond their control. They asked questions that demonstrated sophisticated strategic thinking. Could the valley be defended? Should they seek an alliance with the newcomers? Was migration to more remote territories viable? Farseeker answered each question with the precision of someone who had spent weeks thinking through scenarios. His analysis was sound, his recommendations practical, his assessment of the threat accurate. He was doing everything right. It wouldn't matter. The mathematics of competitive displacement was inexorable. The mountain people. "We should see the others too," Zephyrus said quietly, reading Thalia's distress through their quantum link. "If we're condemning 4 species, we should witness what each represents. Not just Neanderthals." Thalia nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. With a thought, she shifted their observation focus to a Denisovan settlement high in the mountains of Central Asia, where the air was so thin that unenhanced humans would lose consciousness within minutes. The settlement clung to a cliff face at an altitude that seemed impossible for permanent habitation. 23 individuals lived here, an extended family group that had occupied this location for 7 generations, developing cultural adaptations to extreme altitude that bordered on the miraculous. A young female was teaching children how to read weather patterns by observing cloud formations visible only from these heights. Her name was approximated as "she who sees tomorrow" due to her uncanny ability to predict storm days in advance. "The white birds that ride the high wind tell us when cold breath is coming," she explained, pointing to barely visible specks thousands of meters above them, birds that flew at altitudes even Denisovan couldn't reach. "When they fly toward sunrise, warmth follows. When they fly toward sunset, cold breath brings snow death." The children listened with the focused attention of students learning survival skills, but Thalia's monitoring equipment revealed something more profound. The children were learning pattern recognition at scales that exceeded normal hominin perception. They correlated bird movements, cloud formations, air pressure variations, and temperature gradients into predictive models that would allow humans, with modern instruments, to replicate these natural phenomena. "They're developing meteorology through pure observation," Thalia said, her medical consciousness analyzing the cognitive capabilities required. "No instruments, no systematic data collection, just enhanced pattern recognition and generational knowledge accumulation. Their brains process environmental information at scales most species never perceive." She who sees tomorrow demonstrated her prediction method, having the children practice reading subtle atmospheric signs. A slight change in wind direction, barely perceptible. a particular quality of light refracting through high-altitude ice crystals. The sound of distant rockfall indicates temperature-driven stone fracturing. Each tiny detail contributed to a holistic understanding of weather systems. Tomorrow the cold breath will carry snow death, she predicted with absolute certainty. We must prepare the high shelters and bring the valley families to safe rock before sunset. The community mobilized with practiced efficiency, everyone understanding their role in the survival protocol. They secured supplies, reinforced shelters, and brought extended family members from lower elevations to the protected high caves that had sheltered their ancestors through countless storms. She who sees tomorrow's prediction proved accurate. 18 hours later, a blizzard hit that would have killed anyone caught in the open. But the Denisovan weathered it in their prepared shelters, continuing their lives with minimal disruption, adapting to conditions that represented catastrophic environmental extremes for other species. 15,000 years, Thalia said quietly, watching the community emerge from their shelters once the storm passed, resuming their altitude-adapted existence as if killer blizzards were merely temporary inconveniences. That's how long they have. Then climate change eliminates their high-altitude refuges, and enhanced humans occupy the lower elevations where they might otherwise retreat. Through her monitoring equipment, she watched She Who Sees Tomorrow return to teaching. She helped the children understand not just what had happened but why, building their predictive models. This ensured the next generation would be even better at reading the patterns that meant life or death at these altitudes. Knowledge that would die with the last Denisovan, who had no students to teach. The weight of understanding. Thalia sat on the ridge overlooking the Neanderthal valley as the sun climbed higher, trying to process the weight of what she was witnessing. Zephyrus remained beside her, his solid presence an anchor against the tide of grief threatening to overwhelm her healer's composure. I keep trying to find alternatives, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Some way to help them all. Some modifications that would let multiple enhanced species coexist. Some timeline where we don't have to choose. And? Zephyrus prompted gently. And the mathematics is inexorable, Thalia replied, her medical training forcing her to confront reality without comfortable delusions. The enhancements create competitive advantages that make coexistence impossible. Multiple enhanced species would war for dominance, creating catastrophic conflict. Multiple unenhanced species will struggle with environmental challenges, and we could help them overcome them. The moment we enhanced humans, we made this choice inevitable. She pulled up her medical records, showing Zephyrus the genetic analysis of enhanced humans, the modification she had implemented 5 years ago, now expressed across thousands of individuals and passing down through generations with remarkable stability. The neural enhancements are hereditary, she explained, highlighting the relevant genetic markers. Every enhanced human child inherits improved cognitive capabilities. But the same modifications create reproductive barriers with non-enhanced hominins. Hybrid offspring show developmental abnormalities, as the enhanced neural architecture is incompatible with unenhanced genetics. We've made humans into a separate species, isolated from their cousins by genetic modifications meant to help them. Speciation through intervention, Zephyrus observed, his architect's mind recognizing structural inevitability. You didn't just enhance their capabilities, you created a new branch of intelligence that can't merge back into the original stock. Exactly, Thalia confirmed, the admission feeling like a confession of a crime whose magnitude exceeded comprehension. And that new branch has advantages that make competitive displacement inevitable. Enhanced humans adapt faster to changing conditions. They develop new technologies more rapidly. They coordinate large-scale cooperation more effectively. They learn from other groups and integrate innovations with unprecedented efficiency. She showed him population projections, mathematical models tracking the expansion of enhanced human populations and the corresponding contraction of every other hominin species. The curves were brutally clear. Within 12,000 years, Neanderthals would be extinct. Within 15,000 years, Denisovan would be gone. The other species would fall even faster. Every enhanced human child born, Thalia said, her voice carrying the weight of species-level arithmetic, represents resource competition that pushes Neanderthals toward extinction. Every innovation that enhances human development widens the capability gap. Every generation of successful enhanced human reproduction means one less generation for their genetic cousins. Through the valley below, she could see the Neanderthal community going about their daily lives, completely unaware that their entire species had been condemned by genetic modifications made to their competitors. Reed Singer was still teaching quick hands herbal medicine. Farseeker had returned from his mountain journey with new knowledge that would benefit his people for generations they wouldn't live to see. Craftsmen were creating tools that represented the pinnacle of Paleolithic technology, innovations that would be rendered obsolete by enhanced human capabilities. I saved Asha's village, Thalia said quietly. I prevented one community from being destroyed by knowledge they couldn't handle. And in doing so, I doomed 4 entire species to extinction. The mathematics of intervention: every life saved creates deaths elsewhere in the system. Every advantage given creates disadvantages for everyone competing for the same resources. That's not your fault alone, Zephyrus said, his consciousness firm despite the gentle delivery. Prometheus's unauthorized contact created the crisis. The council voted to intervene. Every immortal who supported enhancement shares responsibility for the consequences. But I'm the one who implemented the modifications, Thalia replied, her healer's training demanding she accept full responsibility for medical interventions and their outcomes. I'm the one with the genetic knowledge who could have refused. I'm the one who knew the risks and proceeded anyway because I couldn't bear to watch humans suffer from preventable causes. She pulled up her personal logs, 5 years of medical observations documenting enhanced human development, tracking the modifications as they expressed across populations, measuring the success rates and beneficial outcomes. Every entry was a small victory, a prevented death, an enabled capability, a reduction in suffering. Every entry was also a nail in the coffin of 4 other species. I can show you exactly which children survived because of the enhancements, Thalia said, her perfect, immortal memory retrieving specific cases. This girl, whose improved immune system fought off an infection that would have killed her. This boy, whose enhanced pattern recognition let him avoid a predator. This infant, whose modified neural development prevented developmental deficits that would have crippled him. But you can't show me the Neanderthal children who will never be born because enhanced humans occupy territories their ancestors would have settled, Zephyrus finished. The Denisovan families who won't exist because climate change eliminates their refuges, while enhanced humans thrive in changing conditions. The invisible deaths created by successful intervention elsewhere. Exactly, Thalia whispered. The arithmetic of extinction: every success here creates failures there. Every life saved costs lives that will never exist. I wanted to be a healer, to reduce suffering, to help vulnerable populations survive and thrive. Instead, I've become an architect of genocide, killing 4 species to save a 5th. They sat in silence for long minutes, watching the Neanderthal valley's daily rhythms continue below. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children played in the stream under watchful adult supervision. Elders sat in the morning sun, sharing stories and preserving knowledge that would die with them. Farseeker was already planning his next expedition, his spatial genius preparing to map territories his descendants would never inherit. Everyday life, carrying the weight of doom, none of them could perceive. We should go, Zephyrus said finally, though his reluctance matched Thalia's own. The council meeting begins soon. They're taking the final vote. Thalia's hands clenched on her equipment, every fiber of her being wanting to refuse, to stay here on this ridge watching the Neanderthals live their lives, to pretend that not attending the meeting would somehow prevent the decision that had already been made 5 years ago when she first enhanced human cognition. But she was the one who had created this situation. She was the one whose healing touch had poisoned 4 species to save a 5th. She didn't get to hide from the consequences. Coming, she said quietly, taking one last look at the valley. At Reed Singer, teaching quick hands. At Farseeker, he planned impossible journeys through mountains that would outlast his species. At 43 individuals living lives of quiet intelligence and dignity, completely unaware they belonged to a species with no future. She committed every detail to her perfect, immortal memory. When the last Neanderthal died and their species became an archaeological mystery, she would remember. She would carry the weight of what this valley had contained, what humanity had lost, what immortal intervention had cost. Some knowledge, she was learning, was worse than ignorance. The burden of seeing clearly what was being destroyed was a price immortality exacted without mercy. But it was a price she would pay, because the alternative, choosing blindness, would be a greater betrayal of the species she had condemned through the very act of helping their competitors. The sun had reached its zenith when they were finally transported back to the ship. Behind them, in a valley cupped between ancient granite walls, the Neanderthals continued their lives, completely unaware that immortal refugees in orbit above them were preparing to vote on whether those lives would have any descendants to inherit the knowledge being preserved with such care. The age of consequences had arrived. And Thalia, who had wanted only to heal, would carry the weight of species-level extinction for the rest of her eternal existence. The council chamber. The council chamber felt too large for 9 immortals, its harmonious architecture designed for the 3,000 who had escaped their dying home world now mockingly empty. Thalia sat beside Zephyrus, drawing strength from his solid presence, grateful for the subtle way his consciousness remained linked to hers through the quantum network. Zephyrus examined the council chamber with an architect's inability not to assess structure, ceiling span adequate for current occupancy, but expansion beyond 9 attendees would require additional support columns at 3.7-meter intervals. Ventilation patterns suggested 3 natural thermal circulation cells that could be optimized by repositioning the eastern panels. Floor load-bearing capacity exceeded requirements by 340%. He forced himself to focus on the actual discussion rather than mentally redesigning the space. Every room was a problem to solve, every structure an optimization challenge, every architectural element a variable requiring adjustment. Nyx stood at the chamber center, surrounded by holographic displays showing 5 colored markers: red, blue, green, yellow, purple, each representing an intelligent species awaiting judgment. The analysis is complete, Nyx stated, her clinical tone failing to mask the weight of what she was presenting. We can enhance one species successfully. Attempting multiple enhancements will fail due to genetic incompatibility and timeline constraints. No enhancement means all 5 species struggle through Ice Age conditions without assistance. The mathematics is unambiguous. We choose one, or we choose none. Choosing none means natural selection proceeds without further interference, Erebus observed from his position at the chamber's edge. Yes, populations will suffer. Yes, some communities will fail. But evolutionary diversity would be preserved. The long-term outcome would maintain 5 distinct types of intelligence rather than reducing Earth's cognitive diversity to a single branch. Natural selection that is no longer natural because of our previous interventions, Kronos countered, his temporal calculations displayed across the chamber walls. We've already modified human cognition. Withdrawal doesn't restore balance, it merely allows our artificially created advantages to eliminate natural diversity without accepting responsibility for the consequences. Accepting responsibility requires acknowledging what we're actually doing, Erebus shot back, his voice carrying cold fury that made the quantum link crackle. Not euphemizing it as accepting consequences. We're choosing to commit genocide. 4 intelligent species, millions of years of evolutionary experimentation, unique cognitive approaches to existence, all eliminated because we decided one species deserved enhancement more than their equally intelligent cousins. Sophia moved through the holographic displays, her form passing through the colored markers like a ghost. What about partial enhancement? Limited interventions for multiple species? We could provide medical assistance to Neanderthals without full cognitive modification, environmental knowledge to Denisovan without genetic changes, tool-making inspiration to Floresiensis without neural restructuring. Insufficient, Nyx replied, pulling up comparative projections. Partial interventions only delay extinction, they don't prevent it. Enhanced humans will still outcompete partially assisted alternatives. We'd simply prolong the suffering while guaranteeing the same outcome. Prometheus paced the chamber's perimeter with restless energy, his voice carrying uncharacteristic uncertainty. We enhanced humans because I pushed for immediate intervention. Because I thought I understood the implications. If we'd waited, studied longer, understood the full scope of what we were creating. He trailed off, the unspoken admission hanging in the air, this crisis was partially his fault. Waiting would have revealed the same dilemma, Chorus stated with warrior's pragmatism. 5 species, incompatible enhancements, insufficient resources to help all of them. The fundamental problem isn't timing, it's mathematics. Earth can support 1 enhanced intelligence or 5 unenhanced alternatives struggling in Ice Age conditions. Those are the options. Thalia forced herself to speak, her healer's training demanding honesty even when truth caused pain. The medical data is unambiguous. Human enhancements are stable and successful. Neanderthal physiology is incompatible with the same modifications. Denisovan genetics would require completely different approaches. Floresiensis has a neural architecture too distinct for our current understanding. Erectus are too genetically distant for enhancement with available methods. We can help humans, or we can attempt to help others and risk catastrophic failures across all populations. Help, Erebus said bitterly. Interesting word choice for genocide. It's both, Ether said quietly, her chronicler's consciousness grasping the terrible duality. Help and harm. Enhancement and elimination. Success and extinction. We've created a situation where all outcomes are tragic. The question is which tragedy we choose. The chamber fell silent except for the quantum hum of displays showing 5 species awaiting judgment. Through the holographic projections, Thalia could see population curves, extinction timelines, probability cascades, all the cold mathematics of competitive displacement rendered in precise calculations. But she could also see Reed Singer teaching quick hands. Farseeker is building his mental maps, she who sees tomorrow reading weather in cloud formations. 43 Neanderthals in a valley lived lives of quiet intelligence, accumulating knowledge that would die with them. The vote. Vote, Kronos said finally, his organizational mind unable to tolerate endless debate when a decision was required. Full enhancement for humans, accepting Neanderthal and other hominin extinction. Or withdrawal of all intervention, accepting natural selection without further manipulation. Those are our viable options. The quantum link carried the weight of 3,000 immortal consciousnesses participating in the vote, minds scattered across the globe but united in this moment of species-level decision. Thalia felt Zephyrus's consciousness brush against hers through their link, not influencing, not persuading, just offering support for whatever choice she made. She was grateful for his presence, for the steadiness that had sustained her through 5 years of confronting the consequences of her enhancements. She thought about the Neanderthal Valley. About Reed Singer's wisdom, Quick Hand's promise, and Farseeker's brilliance. About 100,000 years of accumulated knowledge would be lost. She thought about the enhanced human children she'd monitored, whose improved cognition had enabled survival through environmental challenges that would have killed unmodified populations. About communities that had flourished because a mortal intervention had given them advantages their ancestors never possessed. She thought about 5 types of intelligence, each unique, each valuable, each representing distinct solutions to the problem of conscious existence. And she thought about the mathematics that said only one could survive. Her vote traveled through the quantum link with the weight of absolute certainty purchased at the price of absolute horror. Continue human enhancement. Accept the consequences. Around the chamber, other immortals cast their votes with similar weight. Prometheus voted for continuation, his voice carrying the burden of knowing his impetuosity had created this crisis, yet he believed acceleration was still preferable to stagnation. Sophia voted for continuation, convinced by her educator's belief that enhanced intelligence, even limited to one species, was better than leaving all 5 to struggle without guidance. Korath voted for continuation, his warrior's pragmatism recognizing that partial help was still help, that saving one species was better than potentially losing all 5 to Ice Age conditions. Kronos voted for continuation, his temporal calculations showing that enhanced humans had the best probability of long-term survival and eventual technological development. Erebus voted for withdrawal, his voice carrying the cold certainty of someone whose predictions of overreach were being validated. We should never have interfered. We compound the error by continuing. Ether voted for withdrawal, her chronicler's consciousness recognizing that they were crossing a line from guidance into control, from assistance into replacement of natural processes. Nyx abstained, her analytical mind unable to find acceptable solutions in any available option. Both paths lead to tragedy. I cannot choose which tragedy to enable. Zephyrus abstained as well, his architect's consciousness recognizing structural inevitability while recoiling from accepting responsibility for it. The decision was made 5 years ago when we first enhanced humans. This vote merely acknowledges consequences already set in motion. The vote, when tallied, showed a narrow majority for continuation. 5 votes for enhancement and accepting extinction. 2 votes for withdrawal. 2 abstentions acknowledged that all choices led to tragedy. Recorded for history, Ether said quietly, her voice carrying across the quantum link to every immortal consciousness. On this date, 40,000 years before the Common Era, the immortal refugees chose to continue human enhancement, accepting the extinction of Neanderthal, Denisovan, Floresiensis, and erectus populations as the price of human cognitive advancement. 5 species entered the age of immortal intervention. 1 species will survive. May future generations judge us with the full understanding that every alternative available to us was equally terrible, and we chose what we believed would cause the least total suffering. The holographic displays shifted, showing projected timelines with brutal clarity. Erectus extinction, 35,000 BCE, 5,000 years Floresiensis extinction, 32,000 BCE, 8,000 years Denisovan extinction, 25,000 BCE, 15,000 years Neanderthal extinction, 28,000 BCE, 12,000 years. 12,000 years ago, the last Neanderthal died. Thalia would live through all of it. She would witness every stage of decline, watch every community fail, and observe the slow contraction of populations into isolated remnants that couldn't sustain viable breeding numbers. The aftermath. The council chamber emptied slowly, immortals returning to their monitoring stations, carrying the burden of judgment they'd rendered on species who'd never asked for their help, never requested their intervention, never imagined that intelligent beings from the stars would decide which type of human intelligence deserved to inherit Earth. But Thalia wasn't alone in remaining. Prometheus stood at the chamber's far edge, his usually restless form still, staring at the holographic displays with an expression that carried the weight of responsibility finally acknowledged. "I caused this," he said quietly, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "My unauthorized contact with northern tribes. My premature technology transfers. My certainty that I knew better than our protocols. If I had waited, if I had followed the agreed-upon guidelines, we might have had time to understand the full implications before making irreversible changes." "We all caused this," Sophia corrected gently, moving to stand beside him. "I supported your interventions. I argued for active engagement. I believed that sharing knowledge was inherently good, that enlightenment justified risk. We were wrong together." Korath's solid form materialized near them, the warrior who had voted for continuation despite understanding the cost. "I've seen species die," he said, his scarred hands clasped before him. "In our explorations before the collapse, I witnessed civilizations destroy themselves through ignorance, prejudice, and failure to adapt. I voted to continue because I believe enhanced humans have a better chance than 5 unenhanced species struggling with Ice Age conditions. But that doesn't make the choice right, just less wrong than the alternatives." "There are no right choices," Kronos observed, his organizational mind having processed every scenario and found tragedy in all of them. "Only choices with different distributions of harm. We've selected the distribution we believe minimizes total suffering. History will judge whether we calculated correctly." Through the quantum link, Thalia felt the weight of their shared guilt, their collective responsibility, their mutual recognition that good intentions had led to species-level genocide. They had wanted to help. They had succeeded at helping. And their success had led to the extinction of 4 types of intelligence. "I need to remember them," Thalia said quietly, pulling up her personal archives. "Every individual, every community, every unique expression of intelligence we're condemning. Reed Singer and Quick Hands. Far Seeker and his impossible journeys. She who sees tomorrow and her weather predictions. All of them. I won't let them become just statistics in our historical records." Recorded, ether confirmed from her position at the chamber's periphery, her chronicler's consciousness already documenting individual profiles, personal stories, the faces and names that would be lost. They will be remembered. Their uniqueness will be preserved. Future generations will know what was sacrificed when we chose to save humanity at the cost of their cousins. The first decline. The holographic display shifted, showing a projection 500 years into the future. The Neanderthal valley they had observed, Reed Singer's home, Far Seeker's base, Quick Hand's inheritance, appeared on the display with updated population data. The valley was empty. Not destroyed by catastrophe. Not burned or conquered or diseased. Simply abandoned. The Neanderthal population had contracted, migrating to more remote territories as enhanced human expansion made traditional lands untenable. The stone circles where elders had taught for millennia sat silent. The carefully constructed windbreaks protected nothing. The stream that had sustained hundreds of generations flowed past empty shelters. "This is the first stage," Nyx explained, her analytical consciousness tracking the pattern that would repeat across every Neanderthal territory over the next 12,000 years. Not violent displacement. Not warfare or persecution. Just the quiet mathematics of competitive exclusion. Enhanced humans move into shared territories. They're better at hunting, better at toolmaking, better at social coordination. Neanderthals find their traditional resources increasingly scarce. They move to marginal territories, and populations contract. Genetic diversity collapses. Eventually, there aren't enough viable breeding individuals to sustain the species. The projection advanced, showing the wave of abandonment spreading across Europe and Western Asia. Valley after valley, territory after territory, ancient Neanderthal lands became empty as populations contracted into ever smaller refuges. Within 3,000 years, Neanderthals would be reduced to isolated pockets in remote mountains and coastal regions. Within 8,000 years, only a handful of populations would survive. Within 12,000 years, the last Neanderthal would die alone, the final representative of a species that had thrived for hundreds of thousands of years. And similar patterns would play out for every other non-human species. Denisovan contracted into high-altitude refuges that climate change would eventually eliminate. Floresiensis isolated on shrinking islands. Erectus populations dwindled in Java until the last firekeeper tended the last sacred flame and had no successor to receive the tradition. "I can't watch this," Thalia said, her voice breaking despite immortal composure. "I can't spend 12,000 years documenting the extinction of species I condemned through my own interventions." "You must," Erebus said, not unkindly. His voice carried the weight of someone who understood that witnessing consequences was the only honest response to causing them. "We all must. This is the price of intervention, not just making decisions, but living with them and watching what our choices create. Bearing witness to the suffering our help caused. If we turn away, if we refuse to see, then we're not just executioners, we're cowards." Thalia wanted to argue, to reject the burden, to find some way to escape the weight of species-level responsibility. But her healer's training demanded she confront the full consequences of her medical interventions, track outcomes with unflinching accuracy, and accept responsibility for harm caused even through well-intentioned treatment. "I'll watch," she said finally, the commitment feeling like accepting a sentence that would last millennia. "I'll document every stage of decline. I'll remember every lost population. I'll carry the weight of what my enhancements cost the world." "We'll watch together," Zephyrus said quietly, his hand settling on her shoulder with the steadiness that had sustained her through 5 years of impossible choices. "You're not alone in this burden. We share the responsibility. We share the witness. We share the grief." Around the chamber, the other immortals nodded their agreement. Whatever they had voted, however they had justified their choices, they would all bear witness to the consequences. They would watch as 5 species became one, as diversity collapsed into homogeneity, as evolutionary experiments millions of years old ended because immortal refugees had tried to help. The legacy. Thalia remained in the chamber long after the others had departed, staring at the holographic displays showing 5 colored markers pulsing like heartbeats. Red for the humans she'd saved. Blue for the Neanderthals she doomed. Green, yellow, purple for the other cousins who would die because she'd chosen one species over all alternatives. Zephyrus stayed with her, his presence steady, offering silent support that somehow made the grief more bearable. "Reed Singer and Quick Hands," Thalia whispered finally. "Farseeker and his companions. She who sees tomorrow and her weather predictions. All the Neanderthals in that valley, all the Denisovan in their mountains, all the Floresiensis on their islands, all the ancient erectus hanging on in Java. They're going to die because I was good at genetic modification. Because I succeeded at enhancement. Because I was capable of changing one species in ways that doomed 4 others." "You were capable," Zephyrus agreed quietly, his consciousness carrying neither judgment nor absolution, just acknowledgement of truth. "And you chose. And now you'll carry that choice. We all will. It's the price of intervention, not just accepting success, but accepting all the consequences success creates, including the ones that destroy what we never intended to harm." Through the holographic displays, the 5 colored markers continued pulsing. 5 species are entering the age of immortal intervention. 1 species would emerge. 4 species would be lost forever. And the immortals would carry the weight of that arithmetic for the rest of eternity, the first of many impossible choices that would teach them the cost of playing God with species they'd come to save. The age of consequences had claimed its first victims. It would not be the last. Below in the Neanderthal valley, the sun set on another day of ordinary life. Reed Singer continued teaching Quick Hands the accumulated wisdom of 100,000 years of botanical knowledge. Farseeker planned his next expedition into mountain ranges his descendants would never inherit. Craftsmen created tools representing the pinnacle of their species' capabilities. Children played in the stream, laughing with the universal joy of young intelligence discovering the world. They had no idea that in orbit above them, immortal refugees had just voted to ensure their species would have no future. They had no idea that the help given to their human cousins would prove to be their doom. They had no idea that every enhanced human child born was another step toward Neanderthal extinction. They simply lived, as all intelligent beings must, creating meaning in the face of mortality, building knowledge despite knowing death was inevitable, loving and teaching, and dreaming despite the specific knowledge that individual existence was temporary. They were beautiful. They were doomed. and the immortals who had sealed their fate would remember them forever, carrying the burden of unnecessary extinction for the rest of eternity. The decision was made. The species was chosen. The consequences would unfold across 12,000 years of slow decline, contraction, and final extinction. And Thalia, who had wanted only to heal, would watch it all, documenting every stage of the dying, bearing witness to what her successful intervention had cost the world. Some cures, she was learning, were worse than the disease. Some help caused more harm than abandonment. Some healing touch poisoned everything it didn't directly save. The mathematics of intervention were brutal and unyielding. Every life saved created deaths elsewhere in the system. Every advantage given created disadvantages for everyone competing for the same resources. Every choice to help one meant choosing to harm others. She would carry that arithmetic for the rest of her eternal existence, counting the lives saved against the species destroyed, measuring the benefits enabled against the diversity lost, trying to calculate the moral mathematics of intervention in a universe that offered no perfect solutions, only choices and consequences echoing across millennia. The holographic displays finally dimmed, leaving Thalia and Zephyrus alone in the darkness with the weight of species-level responsibility settling over them like the ashes of a dying world. Outside the ship, the blue planet continued its ancient rotation, carrying millions of intelligent minds through their daily cycles of birth and death, creation and destruction, hope and despair. 5 types of human intelligence pursue their brief existences, utterly unaware that gods from the stars had decided only one type deserved a future. The age of guidance had become the age of genocide. And the immortals would carry that burden for the rest of their eternal existence, the price of playing God with species they'd come to save. Chapter 6, The Watchers Network. 44,500 BCE, 6 months after the species decision. The vote had been taken. The choice had been made. 5 species had entered the age of immortal intervention, and only one would survive. In the 6 months since the Council's decision, the immortals had tried to process what they'd done. Some, like Prometheus and Sophia, threw themselves into their work with renewed purpose, determined to ensure that the species they'd chosen to save would justify the sacrifice of its cousins. Others, like Erebus and Ether, retreated into documentation and observation, bearing witness to the slow mathematics of extinction they'd enabled. Thalia had spent those months visiting Neanderthal communities across Europe, Denisovan populations in the high mountains, the last remnants of Floresiensis on their shrinking islands. She documented everything with the obsessive precision of a healer trying to understand a disease she'd inadvertently caused. Each individual she observed, each piece of knowledge she recorded, felt like a small act of penance for the genocide she'd enabled through her successful intervention. But documentation alone wouldn't prevent the extinction they'd set in motion. The enhanced humans continued spreading, with their advantages compounding with each generation and their competition with other hominins intensifying as populations expanded. If the immortals were going to guide this process, if they were going to bear responsibility for the choice they'd made, they needed better coordination. They needed a network. Kronos had proposed it first, his organizational mind recognizing that scattered individual efforts were insufficient for managing planetary-scale intervention. Zephyrus had designed the infrastructure, his architectural genius creating a system that could coordinate immortal activities across impossible distances. Nyx had implemented the quantum communications technology, adapting their refugee fleet systems for permanent planetary installation. Now, 6 months after choosing which species would inherit Earth, the immortals were building the framework that would let them manage the consequences of that choice. The age of scattered guidance was ending. The age of coordinated oversight was beginning. And on a massive sandstone monolith rising from the Australian desert, Nyx was about to activate the first node in a network that would span the globe, connecting immortal observers in a web of quantum communication that would enable them to guide, or at least witness, the transformation of an entire world. The Sacred Stone. The wind that swept across the Australian outback carried stories written in dust and heat, messages older than human memory, scattered like seeds across a continent that had never known ice, mammoths, or the desperate struggle between competing intelligences. Nyx stood atop Uluru, the massive sandstone monolith that rose from the desert like a sleeping giant's dream made manifest in red stone and sacred silence. Her silver hair streamed behind her in the constant breeze, each strand catching the late afternoon light and refracting it in subtle rainbows that no human eye would ever perceive. The wind tasted of desert, iron-rich dust, sun-baked stone, the dry ghost of ancient seas that had covered this land millions of years before humans walked anywhere. Her immortal senses cataloged the temperature differential between the stone's sun-heated surface and the cooling air, the electromagnetic signatures of distant lightning storms, and the faint quantum fluctuations that her equipment would amplify into communication channels. She made final adjustments to the quantum resonance transmitter that would anchor their global communication network, her hands moving through holographic controls that shimmered in the desert air like heat mirages. The device was beautiful in its complexity, crystalline matrices that sang in harmonics beyond mortal hearing, creating sounds that made the air itself vibrate in frequencies that resonated with the fundamental constants of the universe. Probability calculators that could transmit instantaneous messages by manipulating the quantum foam underlying reality itself, exploiting entanglement effects that made distance meaningless. It represented the pinnacle of immortal technology, and she was burying it in Stone Age Earth to coordinate the oversight of an enhanced species. The irony wasn't lost on her. They had fled their dying civilization, carrying technology that could reshape worlds, manipulate stars, and traverse galaxies. Now they were using it to watch primitive humans learn to make better fires and sharper spears. It felt simultaneously like the most critical work she'd ever done and the most absurd waste of capabilities that had taken 20 million years to develop. Network initialization test, she spoke aloud, her words carried across continents by quantum tunneling effects that made distance meaningless. The transmission didn't travel through space, it simply appeared at its destination, quantum entanglement making the concept of between here and there irrelevant. Uluru primary node coming online. The response came instantaneously, not traveling but simply existing simultaneously at both locations. Kilimanjaro responding, Korath's deep voice reached her from the African highlands, where he had established his monitoring station atop the volcanic massif that dominated the eastern savannas. His consciousness carried the particular flavor of concern that had become his default state since Thalia's unauthorized intervention. Human populations are showing accelerated development patterns. Enhanced toolmaking capabilities are spreading through trade networks faster than natural diffusion models predict. The data accompanying his voice created three-dimensional maps across Nyx's vision, trade routes lit up with information flow, settlement populations increasing beyond sustainable rates, and technological innovations appearing simultaneously in communities separated by hundreds of kilometers. The enhancement was spreading, exactly as Thalia had predicted and exactly as Erebus had feared. Denali operational, Prometheus reported from his position in the Arctic wilderness, where Ice Age conditions provided excellent testing environments for enhanced human adaptability. His voice carried the particular enthusiasm that made the other immortals nervous, the sound of someone who saw accelerating change as an opportunity rather than a crisis. Northern populations are developing cold weather technologies decades ahead of projected timelines. Sophisticated shelter construction, advanced hunting techniques, and early evidence of surplus food production enabled population concentration. One by one, the other immortals reported in from their chosen observation points scattered across the globe. Each had selected a position that offered both strategic oversight and symbolic significance, mountaintops and ancient formations that would serve as anchor points for their invisible network of guidance and control. Mountains that would become sacred to humans in future ages, though the humans would never quite understand why these places felt different, why they seemed to resonate with significance beyond their physical characteristics, were once just hills. Zephyrus spoke from the rolling plains of northern Europe, where the mathematical precision of future stone circles was already taking shape in his architect's mind. His voice carried the steady reliability that Nyx had come to depend on, the consciousness of someone who built things meant to last and measured success in millennia rather than moments. Sophia's voice carried wisdom from the Himalayan heights, where the roof of the world touched the infinite sky. Her educator's consciousness was already cataloging the pedagogical implications of rapid human advancement. She was documenting everything: how enhanced humans learned, what teaching methods worked best, how knowledge transferred between communities. Thalia monitored Mediterranean populations from the Atlas Mountains, using her medical expertise to track the health consequences of rapid cognitive enhancement. She approached this with the obsessive attention of someone who knew she had broken protocols and needed to prove that the benefits outweighed the risks. Her reports were detailed to the point of being defensive, with every data point carefully annotated and every outcome meticulously documented. Kronos coordinated logistical analyses from his Andean observatory, where the thin air and vast perspective suited his systematic mind. His consciousness operated like a vast computational engine, processing inputs from all other stations, identifying patterns, predicting futures, and calculating probabilities with mechanical precision. Only Erebus remained silent. Erebus, Nyx called, directing her quantum transmission toward the Siberian coordinates where their most reluctant colleague had established his base deep in the vast forest that would one day be called the taiga. Network synchronization requires all nodes to be active. The pause lasted longer than quantum communication should permit, suggesting a deliberate delay rather than a technical difficulty. When his response finally came, it carried the particular cold disapproval that had become his trademark over the past few months. Present but not participating, came the terse reply from somewhere in the vast forests where mammoths still roamed and saber-toothed cats hunted prey that would be extinct before human civilization truly began. My populations remain unenhanced. Someone needs to maintain control groups for comparison. The statement sent ripples of understanding through the network, consciousness touching consciousness as the implications registered. While the rest of them had been implementing careful enhancements to human communities in their regions, following Thalia's example with varying degrees of enthusiasm and restraint, Erebus had been preserving natural populations as baselines for comparison against their modified subjects. You're maintaining baseline humans, Sophia realized, her educator's mind grasping the implications immediately. Populations without our enhancements to measure against enhanced development. That's, actually brilliant, if ethically troubling. Someone has to remember what humanity was like before we decided to remake them, Erebus replied, his voice carrying the weight of deliberate choice. Someone has to maintain perspective on whether our improvements actually improve anything, or whether we're just creating dependency disguised as help. In 50,000 years, when historians try to determine what we did here, they'll need control populations to measure against. The quantum link carried uncomfortable silence as they processed the truth in his words. Over the months since Thalia's intervention, each immortal had become increasingly invested in their respective human populations, taking pride in enhanced capabilities, technological advances, and cultural developments that exceeded all projections. It was easy to forget that enhanced humans were no longer entirely natural, that every improvement came with the question of whether it was actually an improvement or just a change. Speaking of enhancement effects, Thalia's voice carried a note of concern that immediately focused everyone's attention. After months of defensive pride in her intervention's success, hearing uncertainty in her transmission was jarring. I'm observing developments that exceed design parameters. Nyx felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind, despite the air temperature being 40 degrees Celsius. Uncontrolled enhancement was one of their greatest fears, the possibility that genetic modifications might cascade beyond intended limits, creating changes that could destabilize individuals or entire populations. The quantum resonance experiments that had nearly destroyed their sun had started as controlled modifications to stellar fusion processes. Control was always the illusion that preceded catastrophe. Elaborate, Kronos requested, his analytical mind immediately engaging with potential crisis scenarios, probabilistic models spinning out from Thalia's statement like fractals branching into infinite complexity. The cognitive enhancements are expressed variably across populations, Thalia explained, her medical precision evident in every word despite the underlying concern. Enhanced pattern recognition and impulse control remain within projected parameters, that's working exactly as designed. However, I'm observing emergent capabilities that weren't part of the original modifications. Capabilities that shouldn't be possible with the changes I implemented. Such as? Nyx prompted, activating deep scan protocols to analyze Thalia's regional data in real time. Her displays, filled with neural activity maps, genetic expression profiles, and behavioral observation logs, were terabytes of data streaming across quantum channels, painting a picture that was both fascinating and troubling. Eidetic memory in certain individuals, perfect recall of sensory experiences with impossible detail retention, Thalia reported, her voice tight with implications. Not just good memory, but absolute recall. They can reproduce conversations verbatim from years ago, recreate visual scenes with photographic precision, and remember smells, textures, and tastes with full sensory fidelity. Reaction speeds approaching immortal baselines in others. I've observed hunters dodging predator attacks with reflexes that shouldn't be biologically possible, given neural conduction velocities and muscle response times. She paused, and the quantum link carried the weight of what she was about to say like pressure before a storm. Most concerning, several subjects show what can only be described as limited precognitive abilities. They're predicting events seconds before they occur, not guessing, but actually perceiving probability patterns and quantum fluctuations that give them a warning. One hunter consistently predicts where prey will move before the prey actually begins to move. A weather reader can forecast storms hours before any physical signs appear. A healer diagnoses illnesses before symptoms manifest. The network fell silent, except for the quiet hum of data transmission, as the implications registered. They had designed their enhancements to be subtle, stable, and sustainable across generations, minor improvements to cognitive architecture that would help humans adapt more successfully without fundamentally changing what they were. The emergence of dramatic superhuman capabilities suggested that their modifications were either inherently unstable or interacting with human genetics in ways they hadn't anticipated. Genetic stability analysis? Prometheus asked, his voice tight with implications he was already calculating. His mind worked faster than most immortals, seeing connections and consequences while others were still processing initial data. The base modifications remained stable, Thalia reported, relief evident despite the concerning overall picture. The neural enhancements I implemented aren't degrading or mutating, they're expressing exactly as designed. But they appear to be optimizing. Each generation exhibits slight variations from parental genetics, improvements, refinements, and capabilities that surpass the original enhancement package. It's as if enhanced humans are unconsciously debugging their own cognitive architecture, their brains finding more efficient ways to implement the improvements I gave them. Evolutionary acceleration driven by enhanced intelligence, Zephyrus observed with something approaching awe in his voice, his architect's mind recognizing elegant system optimization when he saw it. They're not just using their enhanced capabilities, they're improving on them through natural selection processes. The enhancements make them smarter, and being smarter makes them better at optimizing the enhancements, which makes them even smarter still. It's a positive feedback loop. This is exactly what I predicted, Erebus's voice cut through their scientific fascination with sharp disapproval, making the quantum link feel colder. Uncontrolled enhancement leading to unpredictable consequences. How long before these optimized humans develop capabilities that exceed our ability to guide or contain them? How long before they start asking questions about where their improvements came from? How long before guidance becomes surveillance becomes confrontation? It was a sobering question that none of them wanted to answer. The immortals possessed technology and knowledge accumulated over 20 million years, but they were not omnipotent. A human population that developed genuinely superhuman capabilities might eventually challenge its ability to maintain its guiding role. And humans who realized they'd been genetically modified by alien intelligences might respond with anything from worship to warfare. Regional reports, Nyx commanded, initiating a comprehensive network analysis that would pull data from every monitoring station simultaneously. All stations provide enhancement status updates. I want full documentation of observed capabilities, population distributions, technology levels, and any anomalous developments. Over the next hour, as the sun tracked its ancient path across the Australian sky and Uluru shadow lengthened across the desert, data flowed through their quantum network from monitoring stations around the globe. Nyx processed it all, her analytical consciousness organizing the flood of information into coherent patterns, identifying trends, calculating trajectories. The picture that emerged was consistent and troubling. Enhanced human populations everywhere were developing beyond their original parameters. In Europe, Zephyrus reported that humans were showing unprecedented spatial reasoning abilities, mentally constructing complex architectural models that enabled building techniques centuries ahead of schedule. They were creating structures that required understanding of load distribution, material stress, and geometric principles that shouldn't have been accessible to Stone Age minds. Shelters that could withstand extreme weather. Storage facilities that preserved food with remarkable efficiency. Ceremonial spaces that incorporated acoustic properties for optimal sound transmission. In Asia, Sophia observed linguistic capabilities evolving at an unprecedented rate, with increasingly sophisticated and precise languages being developed by growing populations. They were generating grammatical structures that linguists wouldn't formally describe for 50,000 years, recursive embedding, conditional tenses, and evidential markers that distinguish between directly witnessed and reported information. Languages that could express abstract philosophy, complex mathematics, and subtle emotional states that baseline humans struggled to articulate. In the Americas, Prometheus noted that environmental adaptations were occurring faster than natural selection could explain. Populations are moving into new ecological niches and adapting within generations rather than millennia. Humans thriving in deserts that should have killed them, in mountains where oxygen deprivation should have prevented permanent settlement, in Arctic conditions that exceeded baseline human cold tolerance. Their bodies were changing, not just their minds. We're not guiding human evolution, Korath observed from his African perch, his warrior's instincts recognizing a fundamental shift in power dynamics that the others were still processing academically. We're trying to keep pace with the evolution we accidentally triggered. The humans are getting ahead of us. And failing, Ether added quietly from her chronicling station, her historical perspective focused on long-term implications rather than immediate concerns. Each report shows human capabilities advancing beyond our predictions. We're becoming reactive rather than proactive. We're documenting changes rather than shaping them. The guide-guided relationship is inverting. Nyx manipulated her displays to show global enhancement patterns, watching as data points pulsed across continents in rhythms that resembled nothing so much as a vast neural network firing in coordinated sequences. The pattern recognition was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Enhanced human populations weren't developing independently, they were somehow coordinating their evolutionary acceleration across vast distances despite having no technological means of communication. They're networking, she realized with sudden clarity that made her consciousness ring like a struck bell. Enhanced cognition is enabling long-distance coordination of development. They're sharing innovations, comparing capabilities, and collectively optimizing their enhancements. Not through technology, through trade routes, migration patterns, inter-community marriages that spread genetic modifications. They're using Stone Age infrastructure to create information networks that function like our quantum systems. A species-wide enhancement project that we initiated but no longer control, Sophia observed, her voice carrying the weight of unintended consequences understood by someone who had spent millennia teaching. They're taking what we gave them and running with it in directions we never imagined. The students are exceeding the teachers. The quantum link hummed with the electronic equivalent of troubled silence as each immortal processed the implications. They had sought to guide humanity's development through carefully controlled enhancement, but their modifications had triggered emergent behaviors that proceeded according to their own logic rather than immortal design. The humans weren't following the plan. They were writing their own plan using the tools the immortals had given them. What do we do? Thalia asked, her medical training demanding treatment protocols for a condition they had inadvertently created but didn't fully understand. We adapt, Prometheus declared with characteristic enthusiasm, his voice carrying the excitement of someone who saw accelerating change as opportunity rather than crisis. If humans are accelerating their own development, we accelerate our guidance methods to match. We need more direct intervention, faster response times, and advanced coordination between our stations. We stay ahead of them by moving faster. Or we withdraw, Erebus countered grimly, his opposition to intervention finally finding clear justification in the observable consequences. Accept that our intervention has already exceeded safe parameters and minimize further damage through non-interference. We stop digging the hole we're in before we hit bedrock. Withdrawal won't reverse changes already implemented, Kronos observed with mechanical logic that offered no comfort. Enhancement effects are hereditary and self-optimizing. Human development will continue to accelerate whether we participate or not. The question isn't whether they'll advance beyond our projections, they already are. The question is whether we try to influence that advancement or simply document it for whoever comes after us. Nyx stood at the summit of the ancient monolith, surrounded by quantum communication arrays that connected her to immortal observers monitoring a species in transition. Below her, the Australian desert stretched to every horizon, carrying scattered communities of enhanced humans who were adapting to their transformed capabilities faster than their immortal guides could track. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in colors that reminded her painfully of their lost homeworld's final hours, crimson and gold in the purple of stellar death. We established this network to coordinate guidance, she said finally, her analytical mind reaching inevitable conclusions that her emotions wanted to reject. But perhaps its true purpose is to coordinate our response to guidance that has exceeded our control. We're not architects anymore. We're witnesses to construction we initiated but can no longer direct. Meaning? Zephyrus prompted, his consciousness touching hers through the quantum link, with a particular resonance that suggested a shared understanding. Meaning we're no longer the architects of human development, Nyx replied, watching data streams that pulsated with the rhythm of a species transforming itself at unprecedented rates. We're witnesses to development we initiated but can no longer direct. We're documentarians recording our own loss of control. We're guiding our students to exceed us. The thought should have been terrifying. They had fled the destruction of their own world partly because their technology had exceeded their wisdom, as their capabilities had outrun their ability to use them responsibly. Now they were watching another species follow a similar path, accelerated by immortal interventions that had triggered evolutionary changes beyond prediction or control. Instead of terror, though, Nyx found herself filled with something approaching wonder. Enhanced humans were developing in directions no species in galactic history had explored. Their accelerated intelligence was enabling capabilities that defied standard evolutionary models. They were becoming something genuinely new in the universe, a species enhanced by immortal science but guided by their own rapidly evolving wisdom. Network status, fully operational, she announced to her scattered colleagues, her voice carrying formality. All monitoring stations are coordinated and functional, primary mission updated from guidance to observation and response. We are watchers now, not masters. We document what emerges and respond as best we can to developments we can no longer predict or control. Response to what? Korath asked, his warriors' practicality demanding concrete objectives rather than philosophical abstractions. To whatever humanity becomes, Nyx replied, watching the data flows that carried messages between immortal observers trying to understand the consequences of their own choices. To whatever emerges from the combination of human potential and immortal enhancement. Whatever these modified minds create when given capabilities beyond their evolutionary preparation is intriguing. We watch. We record. We help where we can without harm. And we accept that the outcome is no longer primarily ours to determine. Through her quantum link to monitoring stations scattered across the globe, she could feel the shared recognition settling over them like morning light. They were no longer the masters of human destiny, if they ever had been. They had become partners in an experiment whose outcome would determine the future of two species, immortals and humans, guides and guided, refugees and natives, all bound together now by choices that couldn't be unmade and consequences that couldn't be avoided. The network hummed with data, and in that data, the future of immortals and humans alike hung in an unpredictable balance. As the Australian night deepened around her ancient observation post, Nyx maintained her vigil atop Uluru, coordinating communications between immortal watchers who were learning that the most significant challenge wasn't guiding another species' evolution, it was keeping up with evolution that had acquired a momentum of its own. The stars emerged in the darkening sky, familiar constellations that had shone on their lost home world, now shining on this blue refuge where they'd tried to help and might have, instead, created something extraordinary, terrible, and utterly unprecedented. The watchers were being watched, although the humans didn't yet know they were being watched. The guides were being guided by consequences they'd initiated but couldn't control. The game had changed in ways none of them had anticipated. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, millions of enhanced human minds were dreaming dreams that would reshape the world, thinking thoughts that immortal intervention had made possible, becoming something new that was neither purely human nor purely immortal, but something else entirely, something that might transcend both, destroy both, or save both. The network hummed. The data flowed. The future approached with inevitable momentum. And 12 immortal refugees tried to understand what they'd helped create, knowing that understanding might come too late, that wisdom might follow rather than precede the changes they'd initiated, that the most critical work they'd ever done might also be the most dangerous. The age of guidance was ending. The age of response was beginning. And neither immortals nor humans could predict where it would lead. Chapter 7, The Cave Artists. 40,000 BCE, 4,000 years after network establishment. The Hidden Galleries. Deep in the limestone caverns of southwestern France, a cave system that would remain hidden from human discovery for 40,000 years, Sophia moved through passages that had never known sunlight, her immortal form casting dancing shadows on walls that held the dreams of an entire species. The cave system stretched for miles beneath the rolling hills, a labyrinth of natural galleries and chambers that seemed designed by some ancient architect for purposes beyond mere shelter. The air tasted of stone and water and time, cool moisture that condensed on limestone surfaces, mineral-rich droplets that had been forming stalactites for millennia, the faint organic scent of bat guano, and the earthiness of clay deposits. Her enhanced hearing picked up the constant drip-drip-drip of water shaping stone, the flutter of bat wings in distant chambers, and the whisper of air currents moving through passages like the cave system's breath. The darkness didn't impede her, immortal vision operated across spectrums that made dark a meaningless concept, but she brought light anyway, out of respect for the humans who worked here. A soft, bioluminescent glow emanated from panels she'd positioned at strategic points, their quantum-enhanced photons providing illumination that approximated natural daylight without the heat or smoke of torches. But it was not the caves themselves that had drawn Sophia here, magnificent as they were. It was what the enhanced humans were creating within them. She paused before a section of wall where a young human artist worked by the flickering light of a carefully maintained flame. The woman's shadow danced across the limestone in patterns that seemed to make the painted animals move. The artist, her name was something close to Morali in Sophia's translation matrix, moved with focused intensity that bordered on the sacred, her hands guiding primitive brushes with precision that defied her crude tools. The pigments she used were extraordinary in themselves, ochres and manganese that shouldn't have been available in this region, requiring trade networks that spanned hundreds of kilometers, mixed with binding agents that displayed knowledge of chemistry centuries ahead of the technological timeline, animal fats semi-solidified with plant extracts, mineral additives that improved pigment stability, and preservatives that would make these paintings last tens of thousands of years when they should have faded within centuries. But the paintings themselves were breathtaking in ways that transcended mere technical achievement. Massive aurochs thundered across the limestone walls in perfect perspective, a three-dimensional representation that required an understanding of sight lines, vanishing points, and foreshortening principles that human artists wouldn't formally codify for 40,000 years. Their muscles were depicted with anatomical accuracy, suggesting that the artist understood skeletal structure, circulatory systems, and movement dynamics far beyond what should have been possible for a Paleolithic hunter. Horses galloped in herds that seemed to pour from the stone itself, their forms so lifelike that they appeared to shift and dance in the flame light, as if the limestone had become a window rather than a wall, revealing some other world where painted animals lived and breathed. Most remarkably, human figures moved through the compositions with symbolic complexity that spoke to abstract thinking approaching immortal sophistication, not just depicting humans, but representing concepts like courage, wisdom, community, sacrifice through visual metaphor. Beautiful, isn't it? Sophia spoke softly in the harmonic frequencies that made her words universally comprehensible, careful not to startle the artist who was deeply concentrated. Her voice carried undertones that human ears would unconsciously interpret as gentle, trustworthy, maternal, subtle quantum manipulation of acoustic properties that made listeners feel safe in her presence. Murali looked up from her work, her dark eyes reflecting the flame light with an intelligence that made Sophia's breath catch despite millennia of experience observing sentient minds. The genetic modifications were expressing themselves differently in each human population. Still, in the artistic communities of prehistoric Europe, they had created something unprecedented, minds capable of translating three-dimensional reality into two-dimensional representations with mathematical precision that bordered on the supernatural. "You are the dream bringer," Murali said without surprise, as if an immortal visitation was a natural part of her artistic process, which perhaps it was, given how enhanced cognition interpreted inspiration. Her voice carried the particular harmonic quality of Neanderthal-human hybrid speech, sounds produced by vocal anatomy that blended two evolutionary lineages. The one who touches thoughts and makes them clearer. Sophia felt a moment of alarm that made her typically composed demeanor flicker. Direct recognition of an immortal presence violated every protocol they had established, threatening the careful separation between guides and the guided that prevented dependency in the formation of cargo cults. But as she studied Murali's expression more carefully and analyzed the neural patterns accompanying her statement, she realized this wasn't a conscious identification of her true nature. The enhanced human brain was interpreting immortal influence through the lens of artistic inspiration, a divine muse rather than an alien genetic modifier. The same cognitive enhancements that enabled sophisticated art also created frameworks for understanding the origins of that capability. Murali knew something had touched her mind and made her more capable, but she was processing it through mythological categories rather than scientific ones. "Your paintings capture life with remarkable accuracy," Sophia observed, settling gracefully onto a stone ledge that positioned her at eye level with the artist. She moved with deliberate slowness, making herself less intimidating, more approachable. "The proportions, the movement, the sense of depth, these techniques shouldn't be possible with your current tools. Yet here they are, rendered with precision that would take most species millennia to develop." Murali smiled, the expression transforming her paint-streaked face with warmth that reminded Sophia why she had devoted her immortal existence to education. The young woman's joy in her work was pure, uncomplicated by the existential questions that plagued immortal consciousness. She created because creation brought her satisfaction, shared her art because sharing brought joy to others, and preserved knowledge through images because she believed knowledge was worth preserving. Simple purposes that somehow felt more profound than any of the complex motivations that had driven their lost civilization. "The animals show me how they wish to be painted," Murali explained, her enhanced linguistic capabilities allowing her to express concepts her unmodified ancestors would have struggled to articulate. "The stone tells me where the line should go, its texture suggests form, its color influences pigment choice, its curves create the bodies I paint upon them. And the colors." She gestured to her palette of impossible pigments, each one requiring knowledge of mineral chemistry, trade route geography, and material processing that exceeded Stone Age parameters. "The colors sing their true names when I know how to listen. Red of blood speaks differently than red of clay. Black of char carries a different meaning than black of stone. I hear the songs and translate them into images." Enhanced pattern recognition, expressed as artistic intuition, synesthesia, was created by neural modifications that connected sensory processing centers in novel ways. Sophia made mental notes as she observed Murali return to her work. The young woman's movements flowed with unconscious mastery, suggesting that her enhancements had integrated seamlessly with her artistic training. The brush moved across the limestone with a confidence stemming from perfect hand-eye coordination, enhanced by immortal neural modifications. colors mixed with an intuitive understanding of chemical properties that were derived from pattern recognition capabilities designed for tracking prey, but now applied to pigment chemistry. Compositional decisions emerged from spatial reasoning intended for navigation but repurposed for aesthetic organization. "May I see the other galleries?" Sophia asked, though her question was purely rhetorical. Her immortal senses had already mapped the entire cave system and catalogued its contents with precision that exceeded any human explorer's capabilities for the next 50,000 years. Murali nodded, setting down her brushes with careful reverence. These tools were precious, representing hours of work gathering animal hairs, finding the right wood for handles, and treating the bristles with oils that kept them flexible. Theron is working in the deep chamber. He paints the great hunt that brought our ancestors across the ice. And Kava creates the star maps that guide travelers through the longest nights. Star maps. Sophia's analytical mind was engaged by alarming implications that turned her educational excitement into pedagogical concern. Enhanced humans were developing astronomical knowledge centuries ahead of schedule. They created navigational aids that suggested an understanding of celestial mechanics far beyond what should have been possible for nomadic hunter-gatherers who had no writing system, no mathematical notation, and no instruments beyond naked eye observation. They moved deeper into the cave system, their footsteps echoing in chambers that served as humanity's first art schools. Each gallery revealed new wonders and new concerns, paintings that demonstrated mastery of advanced techniques that seemed impossible, sculptures that showed an understanding of three-dimensional form and proportion suggesting mathematical sophistication, and, most troubling of all, symbolic systems that appeared to encode complex information in visual metaphors. The passages narrowed as they descended, requiring them to duck through low sections where limestone pressed close on all sides. The air grew cooler, more still, carrying the weight of stone pressing down from above. Sophia's geological knowledge catalogued the formations. This system was old, carved by underground rivers during ice ages when sea levels had been lower, and modified by human hands in recent decades to create pathways between natural chambers. In the deepest chamber, accessible only through passages that required crawling through narrow limestone tunnels that would make any claustrophobe panic, they found Theron working on what could only be described as a masterpiece. The gallery walls curved around them like the inside of a sphere, and the young man, barely 20 by human reckoning, had covered every surface with a continuous narrative that flowed from wall to ceiling to floor in seamless integration. The story told was remarkable: human migration across ice bridges that connected continents during the glacial maximum, encounters with massive creatures that had vanished from the Earth millennia ago, mammoths, giant sloths, and dire wolves. The archaeological accuracy suggested either genetic memory or accessed, oral traditions preserved across hundreds of generations, and most significantly, contact with beings of light and wisdom who guided during moments of crisis. The light givers, Theron explained without looking up from his work, his hands moving with the sure confidence of enhanced fine motor control that made every brushstroke precise. His voice carried the particular depth that suggested Neanderthal ancestry. The vocal cords were differently configured, producing harmonies that pure sapiens couldn't match. They came when the great cold threatened to swallow all warmth, when the hunting grounds turned to ice, when our people faced the final darkness. They touched our minds and showed us new paths, gave us capabilities we had not possessed, made us more than we were. Sophia studied the painted figures, which clearly represented contact with early human populations. The artistic interpretation was stylized and symbolic, rather than literal. The immortals appeared as beings of pure light, without distinct features, radiating an influence that touched human minds, represented as geometric patterns emanating from their forms. But the core narrative was unmistakably accurate. Enhanced humans weren't just developing advanced artistic capabilities, they were unconsciously documenting an immortal influence on their species' development, creating permanent records of interventions that they understood mythologically but recorded accurately. Future archaeologists would view these images and dismiss them as religious fantasy, never realizing they were gazing at documentary evidence of actual events. "These are sacred images," she observed, choosing words that would resonate with Murali and Theron's cultural framework. "They carry important meaning for your people, preserve knowledge that must not be lost." "All images carry meaning," Kava's voice echoed from the far side of the chamber, where the third artist worked on astronomical charts of startling precision. She was older than the others, perhaps 40, ancient by Stone Age standards, with gray streaking through her hair, tied back with leather cords. Her hands showed the particular deformities of severe arthritis, but they moved with steady precision that suggested enhanced pain tolerance and motor control compensating for damaged joints. "But some meanings reach deeper than others," Kava continued, never pausing in her delicate work of adding tiny marks to a lunar calendar that human astronomers wouldn't equal for millennia. These speak of debts that cannot be repaid, gifts that cannot be returned, guidance that shapes everything that comes after. We paint them so that future people will know, we were not alone. We were helped. We were changed. The astronomical charts were even more troubling than the historical narratives. Kava had somehow mapped stellar positions with accuracy that required centuries of systematic observation, star positions plotted with precision that suggested understanding of Earth's rotation, axial precession, and seasonal variations. Lunar cycles charted with mathematical precision that required sophisticated mathematics they shouldn't possess. And most impossibly, predictions of celestial events that wouldn't occur for generations, eclipses, planetary alignments, cometary returns calculated using principles that wouldn't be formalized until the scientific revolution. How do you know where the stars will be in seasons yet to come? Sophia asked, though she suspected the answer would only deepen her concerns about enhancement effects exceeding design parameters. The lights in the sky sing the same songs the colors sing, Kava replied, her brush adding delicate details to a prediction of a solar eclipse that Sophia's own calculations confirmed would occur in 17 years. They tell me where they have been and where they are going. The patterns repeat, but the repetitions change, creating new patterns. I see the patterns of patterns, the rhythms beneath rhythms, the songs that sing themselves. Enhanced temporal pattern recognition operating at levels that approach genuine precognition, the ability to perceive complex patterns across time scales that should have remained beyond cognitive reach. Sophia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cave's natural coolness. The genetic modifications were expressing themselves in ways that approached or exceeded immortal capabilities in specific domains. These humans weren't just enhanced, they were developing superhuman abilities through mechanisms the immortals didn't fully understand. We must preserve this, she said finally, speaking as much to herself as to the artists, her educator's consciousness automatically calculating how to protect and transmit this knowledge. These images, these techniques, these insights, they represent knowledge that mustn't be lost. Future generations must be able to learn from what you've created here. The stone remembers, Morali said simply, returning to her aurochs painting with steady focus. What we paint here will endure long after our bodies return to the earth. Others will come, in times far distant, and they will understand that we were here. That we saw beauty in the world and tried to capture it. That we knew we were not alone, that beings greater than ourselves walked among us and helped us become more than we were. Sophia spent the next several hours working alongside the three artists, ostensibly learning their techniques but actually implementing subtle modifications to their pigment chemistry and binding agents. The paints they were using would last tens of thousands of years instead of mere centuries, thanks to quantum stabilization of chemical bonds that preserve pigments against degradation. The cave's environment would remain stable, protected from water damage and temperature fluctuations by imperceptible, yet immortal, climate modifications in the surrounding region. Most importantly, the artistic knowledge would be preserved in the genetic memory of the enhanced human population, passed down through generations as an innate understanding of form, color, and proportion. But as she worked, Sophia found herself grappling with implications that extended far beyond art preservation. These humans weren't just creating beautiful images, they were documenting immortal contact, encoding advanced knowledge in symbolic systems to preserve information across millennia, and developing capabilities that suggested their enhancements were evolving beyond original parameters. The cave paintings would survive. In 50,000 years, human archaeologists would discover these galleries and marvel at the sophistication of Paleolithic art, creating elaborate theories to explain how Stone Age hunters could produce such masterpieces. They would never know they were looking at the work of genetically enhanced humans guided by immortal intervention, creating art that documented the very intervention that made such art possible. The network consultation. Network consultation required, Sophia subvocalized into her quantum communication system as she added the final touches to Morali's binding agent mixture, ensuring it would preserve the pigments for 50 millennia. Priority analysis needed on artistic populations showing capabilities beyond predicted parameters. "This is Nyx," came the immediate response from the Australian monitoring station, her consciousness carrying the particular alertness of someone who had been expecting this call. "What's your status, Sophia?" "The artistic populations are developing beyond projected capabilities in ways that create both opportunities and risks," Sophia reported, her voice carrying the weight of concerns refined through hours of observation. "They're unconsciously documenting our presence in permanent form, creating knowledge preservation systems that will outlast any civilization, and showing evidence of temporal pattern recognition approaching precognitive levels." The quantum link carried a moment of silence as the implications registered across the network connecting all 512 immortals. Then Thalia's voice joined the conversation, her medical consciousness immediately recognizing familiar patterns. I'm observing similar developments in Mediterranean populations. Enhanced medical intuition operating at levels that exceed available knowledge base, healers diagnosing illnesses before symptoms manifest, predicting complications days before they occur, understanding disease transmission without germ theory. Diagnostic capabilities that work despite violating their understanding of anatomy and physiology. Technological acceleration continuing in northern regions, Prometheus added from his Arctic station, his voice carrying enthusiasm that made the others nervous. Toolmaking capabilities that suggest understanding of metallurgy, engineering principles, and materials science beyond their apparent technological base. They're creating composite tools that require an understanding of stress distribution, material properties, and failure modes. Knowledge they shouldn't possess. The enhancements are cascading beyond design parameters across all monitored populations, Erebus observed grimly from his Siberian position, his consciousness weighed down by the validation of predictions. Each generation shows capabilities beyond the previous, innovations that exceed the sum of their inherited knowledge. They're not just using enhanced intelligence, they're enhancing the intelligence itself through mechanisms we don't understand. Ether's voice joined from her chronicling station, her historical perspective finding uncomfortable parallels, undocumenting similar patterns globally. Enhanced humans are developing capabilities that suggest they're unconsciously reverse engineering the principles underlying their own cognitive modifications. They don't understand genetics or neuroscience, but they're intuitively optimizing their own neural architecture through processes that resemble deliberate self-modification. The quantum link hummed with tension as the full scope of the situation became clear across the network. Enhanced humans weren't just using their improved capabilities in expected ways. For example, they continually refined their skills, creating a positive feedback loop that accelerated cognitive development to genuinely superhuman levels in specific domains. Recommendations? Nyx asked, her role as network coordinator requiring practical solutions to theoretical problems that were rapidly becoming practical crises. Continue observation but prepare for acceleration, Sophia replied, watching Murali add impossible details to her aurochs painting with brushes that couldn't possibly achieve such precision. These humans are developing faster than our models predicted. We may need to reconsider our entire approach to guidance because the relationship is inverting. We're no longer guiding development, we're trying to understand development that's proceeding according to its own logic. Or accept that guidance is no longer possible and transition to pure observation, Erebus added darkly, his opposition to intervention finding validation in every report. They may soon exceed our ability to guide them meaningfully. As Sophia walked away from the caves, emerging into pale dawn light that made the ordinary world seem dim after hours in galleries illuminated by immortal technology, she carried with her the unsettling realization that enhanced humans were not only documenting immortal influence on their development, they were consciously preparing for a future in which that influence would no longer be necessary. The student species was approaching graduation, and their immortal teachers were beginning to wonder if they had taught them too well. Behind her, in the depths of the limestone caves, 3 enhanced humans continued their work, creating artistic masterpieces that encoded the history of immortal guidance while simultaneously demonstrating that such guidance was becoming obsolete. The age of dependence was ending. The age of human independence had begun. And the immortals would have to learn to live with what they'd helped create, a species that might soon exceed them, transcend them, or replace them entirely in the cosmic order of things. The cave paintings would endure. The truth they documented would survive. In 50,000 years in the future, human archaeologists would stand in these galleries and wonder how Paleolithic hunters could have created such sophisticated art, never knowing they were looking at documentary evidence of the moment when humanity stopped being entirely human and started becoming something more. The cave paintings spread. Over 5,000 years, the techniques Sophia taught in those first galleries propagated across continents with the slow inevitability of glaciers advancing. From the Atlantic coast to the Ural Mountains, from Iberia to the Levant, enhanced humans created art that seemed to emerge fully formed, perspective, shading, and anatomical accuracy appearing simultaneously across impossible distances. The immortals watched their influence compound. Artistic capability bred abstract thinking. Abstract thinking demanded more sophisticated communication. And sophisticated communication would require something the immortals had not yet provided, a linguistic framework capable of carrying the complex thoughts that enhanced minds now generated with frightening ease. In those 5 millennia, the immortal population remained stable at 512. No children yet, the refugees were still establishing their presence, building their hidden infrastructure, learning to guide without revealing themselves. But partnerships were forming. Thalia and Zephyrus spent more and more time together, their consciousnesses harmonizing in ways that suggested future commitment. Sophia and Ether collaborated constantly, their work on human cultural development creating bonds deeper than professional cooperation. The Earth was becoming home. Slowly. Carefully. But undeniably. Human populations grew from 1 million to nearly 2 million souls. Settlements expanded. Trade networks lengthened. Art proliferated in forms that would baffle future archaeologists. Why did sophisticated cave painting appear simultaneously across vast distances? How did isolated populations develop identical techniques? The immortals knew the answer, because Sophia taught them. Enhanced cognition spreads innovations through observation and emulation. Because humanity was developing faster than natural evolution could explain. But artistic ability created a new problem. Enhanced humans could visualize complex concepts but struggled to communicate them across language barriers. Innovations remained isolated. Knowledge stayed local. The fragmentation of human dialects was becoming a bottleneck that limited the very development the immortals were trying to foster. Sophia began to plan her subsequent intervention. If humans could paint reality, perhaps they were ready to speak it with equal precision. The linguistic revolution was about to begin. The Upper Paleolithic Revolution. What human archaeologists would later call the Great Leap Forward or the Upper Paleolithic Revolution was occurring in real time. Between 40,000 and 35,000 BCE, human capability exploded across multiple domains. Artistic expression, sophisticated cave paintings, carved figurines, decorated tools, symbolic notation systems, all appearing with a suddenness that suggested cognitive transformation rather than gradual evolution. Technological innovation, blade tools, composite weapons, sophisticated hafting, specialized implements for specific tasks, the toolkit expanding beyond simple survival into specialized craftsmanship. Social complexity, larger settlements, extended trade networks, evidence of social hierarchies, burial practices suggesting belief in the afterlife, humanity becoming culturally sophisticated at unprecedented speed. Symbolic thinking, abstract concepts represented in art, religious or spiritual practices, creation of meaning beyond mere survival, consciousness expanding into philosophical territory. Future scientists would propose theories such as genetic mutations, population bottlenecks, selection pressures, and cognitive evolution. They would never suspect the truth, that a small group of immortal refugees had decided to gently push human development, to enhance cognitive capabilities through genetic modification, to guide a vulnerable species toward its potential. The evidence was everywhere if anyone knew what to look for. But who would think to search for alien intervention? Who would believe that cave paintings documented actual contact with beings of light? Who would recognize that the sudden acceleration of human capability wasn't natural evolution but deliberate enhancement? The immortals maintained their secret. They would continue maintaining it for 50,000 years. And the humans would develop, guided by invisible hands, shaped by influences they interpreted as divine inspiration, artistic genius, or fortunate accident. The age of guidance was in full swing. And humanity was responding beyond even immortal projections. The next phase. Sophia stood on a hillside overlooking the Caucasus valleys, where she had already begun identifying the populations that would participate in her linguistic experiment. 5,000 years of observation had taught her which human groups showed the necessary cognitive flexibility, which communities were positioned to spread innovations across trade routes, and which dialects contained elements that could be synthesized into something unprecedented. The artistic revolution had prepared human minds. Now came the linguistic revolution that would give them the tools to share what those minds created. She began sending dreams. Subtle inspirations. Gentle nudges toward the highland valleys where nearly 1,000 enhanced humans would gather in the most ambitious social experiment humanity had yet attempted. They would create a unified language. They would develop communication systems that could carry complex abstract concepts across continental distances. They would transform human coordination from isolated communities into continent-spanning networks of shared understanding. And the immortals would watch, guide, and hope that this intervention succeeded without creating the kind of accelerating cascade that might spiral beyond their control. The linguistic gathering was 5,000 years ago. But the preparation had already begun. Epilogue. This was the dawn of the Upper Paleolithic, the moment when human artistic capability exploded across Europe with a suddenness that would baffle archaeologists for millennia. They would call it the Great Leap Forward, the human revolution, never suspecting that the leap had been given a gentle push by immortal hands. From the Iberian Peninsula to the Ural Mountains, and from southern France to northern Italy, humans enhanced their art, which seemed to emerge fully formed, as if they had suddenly learned to see the world differently. Because they had. Because Sophia had taught them. The cave paintings would endure for 40,000 years, preserving the moment when humanity began its transformation from clever animals into artists, philosophers, and dreamers. The limestone galleries would remain hidden until human archaeologists discovered them in the 20th century, providing evidence of Paleolithic sophistication that challenged every assumption about human development timelines. And in those caves, painted in ochre and manganese by hands that blended Neanderthal and sapiens ancestry, immortal intervention would be documented in symbolic form, beings of light touching human minds, granting capabilities, guiding development. The truth, hidden in plain sight, waiting for a future when humanity might be ready to understand what their ancestors had tried to tell them. We were not alone. We were helped. We were changed. And what we became was both gift and burden, both blessing and responsibility, both achievement and mystery that would echo across 50,000 years of human history. Chapter 8, The Language Makers. 35,000 BCE, 5,000 years after the cave artists. The Gathering. The highland valleys of what would one day be called the Caucasus stretched before Sophia like a vast amphitheater of green meadows and granite peaks, where dozens of human communities had gathered for what appeared to be the most complex social interaction she had ever observed among their species. From her concealed position on a rocky outcrop overlooking the convergence point, she watched nearly 1,000 enhanced humans from across the region engaged in activities that defied every model of Paleolithic social organization. 15,000 years since the immortals had arrived on Earth. It has been 5,000 years since Sophia began teaching cave art. The artistic revolution had prepared human minds for this next leap. If they could translate three-dimensional reality into two-dimensional images, they could translate complex thoughts into linear sequences of sound. The air carried the mingled scents of hundreds of cooking fires, their smoke rising in lazy columns that merged into a haze, softening the mountain peaks. Underneath the smoke, the organic richness of crushed grass from temporary shelters erected across several square kilometers, the distinctive musk of human bodies gathered in unprecedented concentration, the sharp tang of worked leather and fresh hides, and the complex aromatics of foods from dozens of different culinary traditions being prepared simultaneously. The soundscape was extraordinary, a babel of languages and dialects creating acoustic complexity that made Sophia's linguistic analysis systems work overtime to process the information. Dozens of mutually incomprehensible speech patterns overlap, mix, and create interference patterns that somehow resolve into a form of communication. Human voices raised in what sounded like an organized discussion rather than chaotic noise. The particular rhythmic quality of coordinated chanting is notable. The percussive sounds of tools being demonstrated, compared, and improved upon through collective observation. They weren't hunting. They weren't trading, or at least, not primarily trading. They weren't conducting warfare, engaging in territorial disputes, or participating in any of the competitive activities that typically brought Paleolithic communities into contact. They were talking. But not in any way that human communication had ever functioned before, not in any pattern her linguistic models had predicted or prepared her to observe. Network priority alert, Sophia subvocalized into her quantum communication system, which connected all 524 immortals. Her voice was tight with implications she was still trying to process. I need immediate linguistic analysis support. Something unprecedented is occurring in the Caucasus region. This is ether, came the response from the chronicling station, her consciousness carrying the particular alertness of someone who recognized historical significance when she encountered it. What's your observation status? The enhanced populations are. Meeting, Sophia replied, struggling to find adequate words for what she was witnessing because her vocabulary hadn't been designed for this scenario. Representatives from at least 30 different communities across 2,000 square kilometers. They're conducting what appears to be a deliberate attempt to synthesize their individual languages into a unified whole. Not through conquest or cultural dominance, but through conscious, systematic linguistic engineering. The gathering below was unlike anything in the historical record of human development, or, for that matter, any species development. Humans from vastly different geographic regions, speaking mutually incomprehensible dialects that had diverged over thousands of years of isolated development, were engaged in a systematic linguistic exchange that was progressing at an impossible speed. Within hours of their first contact, they were developing pidgin communication systems, simplified hybrid languages that borrowed vocabulary and grammatical structures from multiple sources. Within days, they were creating sophisticated creoles that demonstrated grammatical complexity surpassing that of any single source language. Most remarkably, they were doing it with conscious intent rather than through the gradual evolution that usually governs language development across centuries. Enhanced linguistic processing? Ether asked, her chronicler's mind immediately grasping the implications for human cultural development and information transmission. Beyond anything we predicted, Sophia confirmed, adjusting her scanning equipment to analyze the neural activity patterns of the human gathering with increasing resolution. What she saw made her pause in amazement, her educator's consciousness recognizing pedagogical phenomena that shouldn't be possible without technological support. The enhanced humans weren't just communicating, they were actively restructuring their own language centers in real time, creating new neural pathways to accommodate increasingly complex grammatical systems. Their brains were literally rewiring themselves through social interaction, optimizing language processing centers on timescales of hours rather than the evolutionary timescales of millennia that typically govern such changes. At the center of the gathering, three figures stood out prominently. Their positioning and the attention directed toward them suggested leadership roles or perhaps expert status in whatever was occurring. A young woman with the characteristic bone structure of the northern forest peoples, robust build, a lighter complexion adapted to limited sunlight, and facial features suggesting Neanderthal ancestry in her recent genetic past, gestured with fluid grace, transforming communication into a performance art. Her name was something Sophia's translation matrix rendered approximately as Viara. Her voice carried tonal qualities that suggested she was incorporating musical elements into her speech patterns, creating a language that could be sung as well as spoken. A man with the darker skin of the southern grassland communities responded with vocalizations that seemed to blend spoken words with rhythmic clicking sounds, phonemes produced by the tongue against the teeth and palate in patterns that added entire layers of meaning invisible to speakers who hadn't grown up with such sounds. His name translated roughly as Kale, and his linguistic tradition came from regions where hunting communication had evolved to include nonverbal elements that wouldn't alert prey. Most remarkably, an elderly individual whose origins Sophia couldn't immediately identify was somehow facilitating their exchange, translating between not just different languages but entirely different approaches to linguistic organization. The elder's name seemed to be Anon, and they moved between the various linguistic groups with the fluid confidence of someone who had mastered not just multiple languages but multiple paradigms of what language could be. Fascinating, Sophia murmured, moving closer to observe their methodology while maintaining sufficient concealment to avoid detection. Her immortal senses could track conversations across the entire gathering simultaneously. Still, she focused on this central exchange because it seemed to be the nucleus from which innovation would radiate outward. VR was demonstrating concepts that wouldn't formally exist in human linguistics for tens of thousands of years. She spoke in nested clauses that indicated understanding of recursive grammar structures, sentences that could contain other sentences indefinitely, creating hierarchical meaning that required sophisticated mental processing to parse. She used tonal variations that conveyed not just emotional content but also complex temporal relationships, using the same word pronounced at different pitches to indicate past, present, future, conditional, and hypothetical states. Most improbably, she employed gestural elements that added layers of meaning invisible to anyone not trained in her system, hand positions that modified verbs, arm movements that indicated spatial relationships. These facial expressions functioned as grammatical markers rather than mere emotional displays. The river song carries memory paths from when before to when after, she said. However, Sophia's translation was necessarily approximate for concepts that push the boundaries of expression in any language. We who speak must weave sound patterns that hold meaning shapes across all distances and all times. The words must carry truth not just for here now but for there then and might be when. Enhanced metalinguistic awareness, the ability to think about language itself as an object of analysis and manipulation. Viara wasn't just using her native language, she was consciously analyzing its structure and comparing it to other linguistic systems to identify optimal features for a unified communication framework. Kell responded with equally sophisticated constructions from his own linguistic tradition. His language incorporated rhythmic elements that seemed to encode mathematical relationships, patterns of emphasis and duration that conveyed quantity, proportion, and logical operations. Clicking consonants indicated spatial orientations, different click positions corresponding to cardinal directions, vertical positions, and distances. Throat singing techniques added harmonic layers of meaning that multiple listeners could process simultaneously, creating parallel information streams. Ground drums echo star patterns when Skywalker's dreams speak, he replied, his multi-layered vocalizations creating harmonics that Sophia's equipment struggled to analyze comprehensively. We who remember must build word bridges that carry truth weights between tribe hearts without losing meaning essence in the crossing space. What astounded Sophia wasn't just the complexity of their individual languages, but their ability to recognize the underlying structural principles that made translation possible. These enhanced humans were unconsciously applying linguistic theories that academic scholars wouldn't formally develop for 50 millennia, concepts of universal grammar, deep structure versus surface structure, and the relationship between syntax and semantics. The elderly facilitator, Anon, moved between the various linguistic groups with practiced ease, demonstrating when different linguistic traditions encountered incompatibilities and suggesting alternative approaches. When northern communities struggled with the clicking consonants of southern dialects, Anon demonstrated how those same phonemic distinctions could be encoded using whistling techniques that northern vocal anatomy could produce more easily. When southern speakers struggled with the tonal complexities of northern languages, Anon demonstrated how to incorporate tonal information into rhythmic patterns rather than relying on pitch variations. All sound shapes carry meaning seeds, Anon explained to the gathering, their voice carrying the particular authority of age and accumulated wisdom in a world where few humans survived past 40. Different soil minds grow different word trees from the same seed, but root patterns remain constant true. We find root patterns beneath surface differences, we can grow new word trees that all soil minds can nurture and harvest. Over the next several days, Sophia watched the gathering accomplish what should have taken centuries of gradual cultural exchange. They weren't just creating pidgin communication systems, they were developing sophisticated hybrid languages that incorporated the best features of their component tongues while adding entirely new capabilities that none of the original languages had possessed. The hybrid language that emerged was remarkable in its sophistication and unprecedented in its design. It used tonal variations to indicate temporal relationships, creating a system where time was encoded in pitch rather than requiring separate grammatical particles. Rhythmic patterns conveyed emotional states and social context, allowing speakers to communicate not just content but also effect. Gestural elements added spatial dimensionality, enabling three-dimensional descriptions that would take multiple sentences in non-gestural languages. Most remarkably, harmonic singing techniques enabled multiple speakers to layer different types of information in coordinated vocal performances. One speaker could provide narrative content, while another could provide musical accompaniment. At the same time, one added emotional context, and another included spatial or temporal modifiers, all of which were simultaneously comprehensible to trained listeners. But the implications extended far beyond linguistic sophistication. They're sharing knowledge, Sophia realized with growing alarm as she observed the secondary activities taking place around the linguistic exchanges. Not just words, concepts, techniques, innovations. They're using their newly developed communication systems to exchange information at unprecedented rates. The enhanced humans were using their unified language capability for knowledge transfer that exceeded anything she'd predicted. Hunting techniques from the northern forests were being adapted for use in southern grasslands, descriptions flowing through the new linguistic system with precision that preserved critical details. Toolmaking innovations were spreading rapidly between communities, with demonstrations accompanied by verbal explanations that could be understood across linguistic barriers. Most concerning of all, the accumulated wisdom and cultural knowledge of dozens of communities were being synthesized into a collective understanding that exceeded the sum of its parts. Medical knowledge from different traditions is being compared and combined. Astronomical observations from different latitudes are being integrated into more complete models. Mythological frameworks from different cultures are being analyzed for common patterns that might reveal more profound truths. Network emergency consultation, Sophia transmitted, her voice carrying a new urgency that made the quantum link resonate with alarm. The linguistic gathering is accelerating knowledge transfer beyond our models. They're approaching critical mass for technological and cultural advancement that could destabilize entire regions. "This is Nyx," came the immediate response from the Australian station, her analytical consciousness immediately engaging with crisis parameters. Specify the nature of the advancement and potential destabilization scenarios. They're creating a unified language system that enables rapid information transfer between previously isolated communities, Sophia reported, watching as specialized working groups formed around different knowledge domains, toolmaking here, hunting strategies there, astronomical observation over there, medical techniques in another cluster. But that's not the primary concern. The primary concern is that they're using the unified language to coordinate systematic knowledge sharing. They're deliberately accelerating their own development through collective intelligence pooling. The quantum link carried tense silence as the implications registered across the network. Enhanced humans weren't just naturally developing beyond projections, they were consciously collaborating to exceed their individual capabilities through social coordination. They were creating distributed intelligence networks using nothing but enhanced cognition and Stone Age infrastructure. Cultural contamination cascade. Kronos asked from his administrative station, his organizational mind immediately calculating the logistical implications of rapid knowledge transfer across previously isolated populations. Worse, Sophia replied, watching as the human gathering organized itself into even more sophisticated structures. Intentional cultural synthesis. They're not accidentally sharing innovations, they're systematically pooling their collective intelligence to solve problems that exceed individual capability. They're creating emergent knowledge that didn't exist in any single community but emerges from the interaction of multiple traditions. In the valley below, she could see the results of their coordination taking shape with frightening speed. A group working on toolmaking had combined northern flint-knapping techniques with southern hafting methods to create implements that exceeded the capabilities of either tradition alone, composite tools that require understanding of multiple materials, stress distribution, and failure modes. The innovations would spread through their new linguistic networks at rates that made natural technological diffusion look glacial by comparison. Another group had synthesized hunting strategies from multiple regions to develop coordinated approaches that would enable them to take down prey that individual communities couldn't handle, megafauna like mammoths and giant ground sloths that required sophisticated group tactics. Enhanced communication enables improved cooperation, which in turn leads to higher survival rates, resulting in population growth that accelerates all other developments. Most alarming of all, a third group was working on what could only be described as abstract problem-solving, using their enhanced unified language to tackle conceptual challenges that had no immediate practical application but demonstrated thinking approaching immortal levels of sophistication. They were discussing the nature of time, the relationship between observation and reality, the patterns that govern star movements, and the similarities between human social structures and those of ant colonies. Philosophy. Abstract reasoning. Theoretical thinking that preceded practical application by millennia in the normal development of species. They were becoming intellectually sophisticated at rates that outpaced their technological base, creating minds that could contemplate quantum mechanics while still using stone tools. They're not just sharing knowledge, Sophia transmitted with growing concern that bordered on alarm. They're using collective intelligence to generate new knowledge. The hybrid language is enabling them to think thoughts that no individual human brain could construct on its own. They're creating distributed cognition networks that function like our quantum communication systems but using nothing but enhanced neural architecture and spoken language. Recommendations? Nyx asked, though the question carried undertones of crisis management rather than routine consultation. Sophia studied the gathering below, where nearly 1,000 enhanced humans were engaged in the most sophisticated intellectual collaboration in their species' history. The hybrid language they had created was enabling them to coordinate cognitive processes across multiple individuals, essentially creating a meta-mind that exceeded the capabilities of any single enhanced human. Observation only, she said finally, resignation evident despite her educational instincts screaming to intervene, to guide, to shape. Any intervention at this point would be detected. Their pattern recognition capabilities are too advanced, their coordination too sophisticated. They would recognize immortal interference and respond in ways we cannot predict. Respond how? Thalia asked, joining the consultation with medical concern evident in her consciousness. Unknown, Sophia admitted, watching neural activity patterns showing coordinated processing that resembled the quantum networks immortals use for their own communication. But their capabilities are approaching levels where they might be able to resist our guidance rather than simply receive it. They might be capable of independent action that contradicts our intentions. They might start asking questions about where their enhancements came from and why. The quantum link hummed with tension as the immortals processed the implications of enhanced humans who might be capable of questioning rather than accepting, of resisting rather than complying, of choosing their own path rather than following immortal guidance. How long until they disperse? Erebus asked grimly from his Siberian position, his consciousness carrying the weight of predictions being validated, uncontrolled enhancement leading to unpredictable and potentially uncontrollable consequences. 3 days based on logistical analysis, Sophia replied, monitoring the gathering's resource consumption and planning patterns. But the language system they've created is designed for transmission and persistence. They're training representatives who will carry the unified language back to their communities and teach it to others. Linguistic diffusion protocols that will spread the communication framework across the entire continent within a generation. Global linguistic unification, Ether observed with the chronicler's precision, her historical consciousness recognizing a pivotal moment in the development of the species. Within generations, enhanced humans across the entire continent will be able to communicate directly with each other using a shared linguistic framework that enables sophisticated information exchange. And coordinate development accordingly, Kronos added, his organizational mind calculating second and third order effects. This represents the end of isolated human communities developing at different rates. They're creating a continental-scale coordination capability using nothing but enhanced cognition and spoken language. The implications for technological acceleration, cultural synthesis, and population coordination are profound. As the sun set behind the Caucasus peaks, painting the gathering in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Sophia of their lost home world's final hours, she remained at her observation post. Nearly 1,000 enhanced humans sang their new hybrid language into the mountain air, their voices weaving together in harmonic patterns that carried meaning across multiple dimensional layers, content, emotion, context, and temporal relationships all encoded simultaneously in coordinated vocal performance. The sound was beautiful. It was sophisticated beyond anything Stone Age humans should be capable of producing. And it was entirely beyond immortal control. In creating enhanced humans capable of rapid learning and advanced pattern recognition, the immortals had inadvertently created a species that could enhance itself through collective intelligence. The linguistic gathering represented the first emergence of truly distributed human cognition, minds working together to exceed the limitations of individual capability, creating emergent intelligence that transcended its parts. Network status update, Sophia transmitted as the gathering below transitioned into evening activities that resembled formal educational sessions, enhanced humans teaching each other the unified language through structured pedagogy that wouldn't be formalized for millennia. Enhanced humans have achieved coordination capability that approaches our own network efficiency in some domains. We are no longer managing individual communities or even regional populations, we are observing the emergence of a species-wide intelligence collective that operates according to principles we provided but no longer control. Recommendations? Nyx asked, her analytical consciousness seeking actionable conclusions from observations that suggested loss of control. Prepare for the end of the guidance phase, Sophia replied, watching enhanced humans teach each other concepts that would have required immortal intervention to develop naturally. They shared innovations that emerged from collective cognition rather than individual inspiration. They're approaching intellectual independence at rates that exceed our projections. Soon, they won't need our guidance to advance, they'll be advancing faster than we can guide them. The student species is graduating, and we're no longer certain we taught them well enough to survive the transition from dependence to independence. The age of human dependence was ending through mechanisms the immortals had enabled but couldn't control. The age of human intelligence was beginning in forms the immortals couldn't predict. And the relationship between guide and guided was transforming into something unprecedented, not hierarchy but partnership, not control but collaboration, not masters and students but fellow travelers on evolutionary paths that might converge or diverge in ways neither species could anticipate. Through the mountain air, the sound of nearly 1,000 voices singing in harmonic unity carried knowledge, capability, and coordination that would reshape human civilization. The linguistic gathering would disperse in 3 days, but the unified language would spread, evolve, and enable coordination across distances, making tribal organization obsolete and continental cooperation possible. The immortals had given humans enhanced cognition. Humans had used it to enhance themselves further. And now both species would discover together what emerged from that combination, something extraordinary, something terrible, something utterly unprecedented in the cosmos. The age of guidance was ending. The age of consequences had arrived in full force. And neither immortals nor humans knew what would come next, only that it would be shaped by choices already made, capabilities already granted, enhancements already spreading through populations that were becoming something more than human, something less than immortal, something entirely new that the universe had never seen before. Behind Sophia, in the valleys where linguistic synthesis had created unity from diversity, enhanced humans continued their work through the night, teaching, learning, coordinating, planning. Becoming collectively what no individual could be alone. Creating distributed intelligence that might one day rival or exceed their immortal guides. The student had learned. Perhaps too well. And the teachers would spend the next 50,000 years discovering whether their lessons would save or doom both species. The gathering sang into the darkness, and the future listened. The linguistic unification spread faster than any immortal had projected. Within a generation, the unified language reached populations 500 miles from the original gathering. Within a century, it had crossed the Mediterranean, jumped mountain ranges, and spread along river systems that connected the continent like neural pathways. Within a millennium, enhanced humans from the Atlantic to the Urals could communicate with a precision that made the immortals' own quantum networks seem clumsy by comparison. Language enabled coordination. Coordination enabled specialization. And specialization would soon enable technological advancement that would test every protocol the immortals had established. In those 5 millennia between the linguistic revolution and what would come next, the immortal population began its slow growth. The first Earth-born children appeared, 12 immortals born to parents who had chosen Earth as their permanent home. Thalia and Zephyrus welcomed their first child in 34,000 BCE, a daughter who would never know the lost home world, who would grow up believing Earth was the only reality immortals had ever known. Other partnerships followed. Sophia and Ether. Marcus and Lyra. Prometheus began planning his Arctic settlement, dreaming of a family that would be born in ice and raised in the long polar night. The refugee population was becoming something else, colonists, settlers, permanent residents of a blue world that had welcomed them in their darkest hour. Human populations exploded from 2 million to nearly 4 million souls. The unified language enabled trade networks of unprecedented complexity. Knowledge that once remained isolated now spreads across continents within generations. Innovations emerged simultaneously in regions separated by thousands of miles because craftsmen could now communicate precise technical details through traveling traders. The immortals watched their linguistic gift compound in ways they hadn't anticipated. Technology accelerated. Culture synchronized. Human coordination reached levels that rendered individual communities obsolete and enabled continental-scale planning. Prometheus watched the linguistic revolution with growing excitement and growing concern. Humans who could communicate precisely could also innovate collaboratively. And collaborative innovation would accelerate beyond anything their careful projections had anticipated. The toolmakers were about to discover what unlimited communication could accomplish. 5,000 years after the linguistic revolution, human technology had transformed. The simple stone tools that had dominated for hundreds of thousands of years gave way to sophisticated composite implements that required understanding of materials science, stress distribution, and failure modes. Innovations emerged simultaneously across vast distances as craftsmen shared techniques through the unified language, then improved upon those techniques, then shared the improvements in an endless cycle of collaborative enhancement. Prometheus stood in his workshop cave, examining an obsidian blade that represented both triumph and crisis. The immortals had given humans language to share knowledge. Now that knowledge was compounding faster than immortal guidance could manage. The age of controlled intervention was ending. The age of cascading consequences had begun. 3 days. That's how long it took nearly 1,000 enhanced humans to create a unified language system that should have required centuries. Tonal variations encoding temporal relationships. Rhythmic patterns conveying emotional states. Harmonic singing enables multiple layers of simultaneous meaning. Gestural elements add spatial dimensionality. But the language itself isn't what alarms Sophia as she watches from her hidden observation post. It's what they're using it for. Knowledge transfer at unprecedented rates. Hunting techniques are spreading across continents within months. Toolmaking innovations are crossing cultural boundaries within weeks. Medical knowledge, astronomical observations, mythological frameworks, all are being synthesized into a collective understanding that exceeds the sum of its parts. They're not accidentally sharing innovations through gradual cultural diffusion. They're deliberately pooling collective intelligence through systematic coordination. They're creating distributed cognition networks, Sophia reports through the quantum link, her educator's voice tight with implications she's still processing. Using nothing but enhanced neural architecture and spoken language. They're approaching our own network efficiency in some domains. The linguistic gathering disperses after 3 days. But representatives carry the unified language back to their communities, trained to teach it through structured pedagogy that won't be formalized for millennia. Within a generation, the language crosses the continent. Within a century, it spans from the Atlantic to the Urals. Within a millennium, enhanced humans across the entire landmass can communicate with precision that makes isolation obsolete. And unified communication enables something immortals never fully predicted. Collaborative innovation at a continental scale. 5,000 years pass. The immortal population grows, the first Earth-born children appear, 12 immortals who will never know the lost home world. Partnership form. Thalia and Zephyrus welcomed their daughter in 34,000 BCE. The refugees are becoming colonists, settlers, permanent residents of a blue world that welcomed them in their darkest hour. Human populations exploded from 2 million to 4 million souls. Trade networks lengthen. Settlements expand. Knowledge that once remained isolated now spreads across continents within generations. And then, 30,000 BCE, a young smith named Darian makes a discovery. He's been working copper, teaching passed down from Prometheus, carefully subtle, just enough to help. But Darian experiments. He adds tin to copper in proportions that shouldn't work but somehow do. The alloy he creates is more complex than copper, easier to work than stone, and revolutionary for everything: warfare, agriculture, construction, art. Bronze. 20,000 years ahead of schedule.